Hello, my friends, and welcome. I'm so glad you've decided to join me tonight. Before we begin, I want you to take a moment to settle in. Dim the lights, find your most comfortable chair, and leave the busyness of the world behind. While you're getting settled, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Your engagement truly helps, and the more you interact, the more these chilling tales will find their way back to your feed. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows to share a few stories that are as true as they are unsettling. So, take a deep breath, get cozy, and let's explore the dark together. I am not a hero. I did not do anything extraordinary. I made a series of decisions that any person in my situation would have made, and I got lucky. That is all. But what I witnessed during 3 days in February of 2020 changed my understanding of how evil operates in this world. And I need you to know that these things are happening right now in places you would never suspect. Because the monsters in this story were not supernatural creatures or shadowy figures in the woods. They were ordinary people, and that is what makes them so terrifying. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I am 68 years old, a retired high school English teacher from Duluth, Minnesota. I have lived in the same house for 40 years, raised 2 children, buried a husband. I am not someone who seeks adventure or danger. I like routine, predictability, quiet. But in February of 2020, I found myself driving through the worst blizzard in Minnesota history to scatter my husband's ashes at a frozen lake in the middle of nowhere. And what I saw there turned 3 days of grieving into 3 days of survival. My husband Robert died of a heart attack in January of that year. We had been married for 43 years. He was my best friend, my partner, the center of my world. When he died, I felt like half of myself had been ripped away, and I did not know how to exist without him. The funeral was quick. Simple, just family and a few close friends. Robert had made me promise years ago that when he died, I would scatter his ashes at Lake Superior, at a small inlet near a place called Stony Point. It was where we had our first date, back in 1976. A picnic on the rocks, watching the sun set over the water. It was the most romantic day of my life. So, 2 weeks after his funeral, in the middle of February, I packed his ashes into a small wooden box, loaded my truck with supplies, and drove north. I should have waited until spring, until the weather was better, until the roads were clear. But I could not wait. I needed to say goodbye to him, needed to let him go, needed to complete this one last promise. I left Duluth at 6 in the morning, under clear skies. The forecast said there was a storm coming, but not until evening. I thought I would have plenty of time to get there, scatter the ashes, and drive back before the weather turned. I was wrong. The storm hit 3 hours into my drive. Sudden and vicious. The sky went from pale blue to dark gray in minutes, and the snow started falling so thick I could barely see the road in front of me. I should have turned back. I should have pulled over and waited it out. But I was stubborn, grief-stricken, not thinking clearly. I kept driving. The roads got worse. The visibility dropped to almost nothing. And by the time I realized I was in serious danger, it was too late. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest, miles from the nearest town. I saw the sign for a side road, barely visible through the snow. It said Stony Point, 2 miles. I took it, thinking I could get to the lake, scatter the ashes, and maybe find shelter there until the storm passed. The road was narrow, unpaved, covered in ice. My truck slid and fishtailed, and I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. But I made it. I saw the lake through the trees, a vast expanse of white, frozen solid, surrounded by forest on all sides. and that is when I saw the other vehicle. It was an old pickup truck, dark blue, parked at the edge of the lake. There were two people standing next to it, an older man and a young girl. The man was tall, thin, wearing a heavy coat and a hat. The girl looked maybe 12 or 13, small, fragile, wearing a thin jacket that was completely inadequate for the weather. She was shivering, crying, and the man had his hand on her arm, gripping tight. Something about the scene felt wrong. Very wrong. I parked my truck 100 feet away and watched. The man opened the back of his truck, pulled out a large canvas bag, and threw it over his shoulder. Then he grabbed the girl by the wrist and started dragging her toward a small cabin I had not noticed before, about 50 yards from the lake, hidden in the trees. She was struggling, trying to pull away, but he was too strong. I saw him hit her across the face, hard, and she went limp. He picked her up and carried her into the cabin. I sat in my truck, my heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. I told myself it was none of my business, that it was probably just a father and daughter, that I was misreading the situation. But I could not shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but I had no signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers, and I was completely cut off from the outside world. I made a decision. I would drive to the cabin, knock on the door, ask if they needed help. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe everything was fine. But I needed to know. I started my truck, drove slowly toward the cabin, and that is when my truck got stuck. The wheels spun in the snow, digging deeper and deeper, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not get it moving. I was stranded. I got out of the truck, grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, and walked toward the cabin. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. I reached the cabin, a small, dilapidated structure that looked like it had not been used in years. There was a light on inside, and I could hear voices. I crept up to a window and looked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The girl was chained to a chair in the middle of the room, her hands bound behind her back, her mouth gagged. The man was standing over her, talking to someone I could not see. And then a woman stepped into view. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair and a hard, cold face. She walked up to the girl, grabbed her chin, forced her to look up. And then she said something that I will never forget. She said, "This one will do. Her liver is perfect." I backed away from the window, my mind racing. These people were not a father and daughter. They were kidnappers, and they were planning to do something horrific to that girl. I needed to call the police, needed to get help, but I had no phone signal and no way to drive. I was alone, in the middle of a blizzard, with 2 people who were willing to hurt a child, and I had no idea what to do. I went back to my truck, locked the doors, and tried to think. I could not leave the girl there. I could not just drive away and pretend I had not seen anything. But I also did not know how to save her. I was an elderly woman with no weapons, no training, no backup. I was terrified. But I also knew that if I did nothing, that girl was going to die. I decided to wait until dark, until the man and woman were asleep, and then try to free the girl. It was a terrible plan, but it was the only plan I had. I sat in my truck for hours, watching the cabin, waiting. The storm raged outside and the temperature dropped to well below 0. I was freezing, but I did not dare start the engine and risk them hearing me. Finally, around midnight, the lights in the cabin went out. I waited another hour just to be safe, and then I crept out of my truck and approached the cabin. The front door was locked, but there was a small window at the back that was slightly open. I pried it open wider, squeezed through, and dropped into a small storage room. I could hear snoring from somewhere in the cabin, deep and steady. The man and woman were asleep. I found the girl in the same room I had seen her in earlier. She was still chained to the chair, but the gag had been removed. Her eyes went wide when she saw me, and I put a finger to my lips, signaling her to be quiet. I whispered that I was going to get her out, that she needed to trust me. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I searched the room for a key to the chains, but I could not find one. I tried to break the chains, but they were too strong. I was running out of time. And then I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming down the hallway. I looked around frantically for a place to hide, but there was nowhere. The door opened, and the man walked in. He looked at me, at the girl, and his face twisted into a snarl. He lunged at me, and I ran. I bolted out of the room, through the cabin, out the front door, into the snow. He chased me, shouting, cursing. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my legs screaming, but he was faster. He caught me about 50 yards from the cabin, grabbed me by the coat, threw me to the ground. I thought I was going to die. I thought he was going to kill me right there, in the snow, and no one would ever know what happened. But then I heard a voice. The woman, shouting from the cabin. She was telling him to bring me back, that they could not afford to leave any witnesses. He dragged me back inside, threw me into a chair, and tied my hands behind my back. The woman stood over me, her face inches from mine. She asked me who I was, what I was doing there, if I had called anyone. I told her the truth. I was alone. I had no phone signal. No one knew I was here. She smiled, cold and cruel. She said that was good. She said that meant I would not be missed. And then she told me what they were doing, as if she wanted me to understand how clever they were. She said they had been running this operation for years. They would find vulnerable children, runaways, foster kids, kids no one would look for. They would bring them to this cabin, keep them here for a few days, and then transport them to a facility where their organs would be harvested. Kidneys, livers, hearts, whatever was in demand. The black market for human organs was worth billions of dollars, and they were making a fortune. The girl chained in the other room was their latest acquisition. 14 years old, healthy, perfect liver. She was worth $200,000. I asked her how she could do this, how she could hurt children for money. She laughed. She said children were a renewable resource. There were always more. She said she had no moral qualms about what she was doing because the people who bought the organs were desperate, dying, willing to pay anything for a chance to live. She was providing a service, and if a few kids had to die so that rich people could live, well, that was just how the world worked. I felt sick. I felt rage and horror and helplessness all at once. But I also felt something else. Determination. This woman had underestimated me. She thought I was just a helpless old lady who would sit there and wait to die. But I was not going to let that happen. I was going to get out of this cabin, and I was going to save that girl, or I was going to die trying. They left me tied to the chair and went back to bed. I waited until I heard snoring again, and then I started working on the ropes. My hands were numb, my fingers stiff, but I twisted and pulled, and eventually I felt the rope start to loosen. It took me over an hour, but I finally got my hands free. I untied my legs, stood up, and crept out of the room. I went back to the room where the girl was being held. She was awake, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I told her we were getting out, that she needed to be brave, that we were going to make it. I found a toolbox in the corner of the room, grabbed a hammer, and started hitting the chains. The noise was loud, too loud, but I did not have a choice. After a few hits, the chain broke. The girl was free. We ran. We ran out of the cabin, into the blizzard, into the darkness. Behind us, I could hear shouting, the man and woman waking up, realizing we had escaped. But we had a head start, and we used it. We ran toward the lake, toward the frozen expanse of ice that stretched out into the night. I did not have a plan. I just knew we needed to get as far away from that cabin as possible. The ice was slippery, treacherous. We fell multiple times, got back up, kept running. The cold was unbearable, biting through our clothes, freezing our skin. The girl was crying, begging me to stop, but I told her we could not stop. If we stopped, we would die. We had to keep moving. And then I heard the gunshot. A crack that echoed across the lake, loud even over the howling wind. I looked back and saw the man standing at the edge of the ice, holding a rifle. He fired again, and the bullet hit the ice a few feet from us. We ran faster, zigzagging, trying to make ourselves harder targets. He kept shooting, kept missing, but he was getting closer. We reached the middle of the lake, and I saw it. A crack in the ice, a thin line that ran across the surface. I grabbed the girl, pulled her to a stop, and we carefully stepped over it. The ice creaked and groaned beneath us, but it held. The man kept coming, not seeing the crack, not slowing down. I yelled at him to stop, to watch out, but he did not listen. He stepped on the crack, and the ice gave way. He fell through, into the freezing water below. He screamed, thrashed, tried to pull himself out, but the ice kept breaking around him. The woman was running toward him, shouting his name, and she did not see the crack either. She fell through too, right next to him. They both went under, the water swallowing them whole. I stood there, watching, unable to move. Part of me wanted to help them, wanted to pull them out, but I could not. I was too far away and the ice was too unstable. And a darker part of me, a part I am not proud of, felt glad. Glad that they were gone, glad that they could not hurt anyone else. The girl and I made our way back to shore, slowly, carefully. We found my truck, still stuck in the snow, and we climbed inside. I turned on the engine, cranked the heat as high as it would go, and we sat there, shivering, waiting for the storm to pass. It took another 12 hours, but eventually the snow stopped, the sun came out, and I was able to dig the truck out and drive us to the nearest town. I called the police, told them everything. They went to the cabin, found evidence of the operation, documents, medical supplies, records of other children who had been taken. They found the bodies of the man and woman in the lake 3 days later, frozen solid. The investigation led to the arrest of 6 other people involved in the trafficking ring, including a doctor who had been performing the surgeries. The girl I saved was reunited with her family, foster parents who had been searching for her for weeks. She had been taken from a bus stop on her way home from school. I never scattered Robert's ashes. The wooden box is still sitting on my mantle, and I do not know if I will ever be able to let him go. But I think he would understand. I think he would be proud of what I did, of the choice I made to help that girl instead of running away. I like to think he was with me that night, on that frozen lake, giving me the strength to keep going when I wanted to give up. I learned a lot during those 3 days. I learned that human trafficking is not something that only happens in other countries, in faraway places. It happens here, in the United States, in small towns and rural areas where no one is looking. According to the United States Department of State, trafficking in persons for the purpose of organ removal is one of the least reported and least understood forms of trafficking, but experts believe it may be growing. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime detected approximately 300 victims of trafficking for organ removal across multiple countries between 2010 and 2018. But those are just the cases that were reported. The actual number is likely much higher. I learned that kidneys are the most common organ trafficked, but livers, corneas, and even skin are also sought. I learned that victims are often tricked into organ donation, told that human beings have 3 kidneys, or that kidneys regenerate after being removed. I learned that some victims are not paid at all, and others receive a small payment that is nowhere near the value of what they have lost. And I learned that the people who run these operations are ruthless, calculated, and very good at hiding. The case I was involved in was one of the first major prosecutions of human trafficking for organ removal in the United States. The doctor who performed the surgeries was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The other members of the ring received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. But I know there are more operations out there, more people like the man and woman I encountered, more children being taken and hurt and killed for profit. I think about that girl sometimes. Her name is Sophie, and she is 17 now, living with her adoptive family in Wisconsin, going to school, living a normal life. We talk on the phone every few months, and she always thanks me for saving her. But I do not feel like I saved her. I feel like we saved each other. She gave me a reason to fight, a reason to keep going when everything in my life felt hopeless. She reminded me that there is still good in the world, still things worth fighting for. I am telling this story because I need people to understand that trafficking is real, that it is happening, and that any one of us could be in a position to stop it if we pay attention. If you see something that feels wrong, trust your instincts. If you see a child who looks scared or hurt or out of place, ask questions. Report it. Do not assume someone else will handle it, because sometimes you are the only person who can. I also want people to understand how organ trafficking works, how predators operate. They look for vulnerable targets, children who will not be missed, runaways, foster kids, homeless youth. They use deception, coercion, and violence to control their victims. They transport them to isolated locations where no one will hear them scream. And they rely on the fact that most people will look the away, will assume it is not their problem, will not get involved. Do not be that person. Get involved. Be nosy. Ask questions. Call the police. Save a life. But if I had driven past that cabin, if I had convinced myself it was not my business, Sophie would be dead. And the man and woman would still be out there, taking more children, destroying more lives. Winter still makes me uneasy. When I see snow falling, when I feel that cold wind, I am transported back to that frozen lake, to that moment when I thought I was going to die. But I am not that grieving widow anymore. I am someone who survived, someone who fought back, someone who made a difference. And if my story can help even one person recognize the signs of trafficking, can help even one child escape the monsters who prey on the vulnerable, then maybe all of that pain will have been worth something. Trust yourself. Believe what you see. Act when others would look away. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between a child and a nightmare is one person willing to do the right thing, no matter how scared they are. I never did scatter Robert's ashes at Stony Point, but I think he would forgive me. I think he would understand that some promises are meant to be broken, and that some things are more important than closure. I will get there eventually when I am ready, but for now, I carry him with me, a reminder of the love we shared and the strength he gave me when I needed it most. And I carry Sophie's story with me too, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope, always a chance to fight back, always keep going. I want to start by saying that I am not someone who scares easily. I grew up in rural Montana, where winters are brutal and the nearest neighbor could be miles away. I have always considered myself practical, level-headed, someone who can handle themselves in difficult situations. But what happened to me during the winter of 2019 changed everything I thought I knew about fear. It changed how I see the world, how I see people, and it made me realize that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who know exactly how to use the cold to their advantage. This story starts in November, when I was 16 years old. My name is Emma, and I lived with my parents in a small house on the edge of a dense forest in northern Montana. The area was known for its harsh winters, the kind where temperatures could drop to -30 degrees, and snow could pile up 6 feet high in a single night. My family was used to it. We had a generator, a wood stove, enough supplies to last months if we got snowed in. My father worked as a wildlife ranger, and my mother was a nurse at the small hospital in town, about 20 miles away. They both worked long hours, especially in winter when accidents were more common. I had one friend who lived relatively close by, a guy named Charlie. He was a year older than me, the kind of person who was always looking for adventure, always pushing boundaries. We had been friends since middle school, and we spent a lot of time together hiking through the woods, exploring old trails, things like that. Charlie was fearless in a way that sometimes worried me, but I trusted him. He knew those woods as well as anyone. One day in mid-November, Charlie and I decided to go hiking. It was freezing outside, probably around 5 degrees, and there was already snow on the ground. My mother told me to be careful, to dress warm, and to be back before dark. I promised I would. Charlie and I set out around noon, taking one of our usual routes through the forest. The trees were thick with ice, and everything was eerily quiet except for the crunch of our boots on the frozen ground. We hiked for about an hour, following a creek that wound through the woods. At one point, Charlie had the brilliant idea to walk across the ice on the creek. I told him it was a bad idea, but he insisted it would be fine. Of course, it was not fine. The ice cracked, and we both fell through into the water. It was not deep, maybe up to our chests, but the shock of the cold was instant and overwhelming. I remember the feeling of my lungs seizing up, the way my fingers went numb almost immediately. We scrambled out of the water, dripping wet, and I knew we were in trouble. It was 5 degrees outside, we were soaking wet, and we were at least 2 hours from home. Charlie tried to laugh it off, said we just needed to keep moving to stay warm. But I could see the panic starting to creep into his eyes. We hiked as fast as we could, trying to generate body heat, but I could feel my body temperature dropping. My clothes were freezing to my skin, my hair was turning to ice, and every step felt heavier than the last. By the time we made it back to the main road, I was shaking so badly I could barely walk. We were about half a mile from Charlie's house, and I just wanted to get inside, get warm. But that is when my phone rang. It was my mother. She was furious. She had been trying to reach me for over an hour, and she demanded that I come home immediately. I tried to explain that I was freezing, that I needed to warm up first, but she would not listen. She just kept yelling at me to come home right now. So I did. I left Charlie at his house and started walking home, still soaking wet, still freezing. I was shivering so hard my teeth were chattering, and I could feel my body shutting down. I knew I was in danger, real danger, but I was too scared of my mother's anger to stop. I just kept walking. That walk home was one of the worst experiences of my life. Every gust of wind felt like knives cutting into my skin. My vision started to blur, and I remember thinking that I might actually die out there on that road. But I kept going. About 10 minutes into my walk, I noticed something strange. There was a house on the road between Charlie's place and mine, a house I had passed 100 times before, but never really paid attention to. It belonged to a man everyone in the area called Mike. I had heard stories about him, strange stories. People said he was paranoid, that he had cameras all over his property, that he was involved in some shady stuff. My father had warned me to stay away from his house, said Mike was not the kind of person you wanted to mess with. But as I was walking past his house that day, freezing and desperate, I thought about asking him for help. I thought about knocking on his door, asking if I could warm up for just a few minutes. But something stopped me. Maybe it was my father's warning, or maybe it was the way the house looked, dark and unwelcoming even in the middle of the day. I decided to just keep walking. But as I passed by, I noticed the cameras. There were several of them mounted on the fence around his property, and they were all pointed at the road. And as I walked past, I swear I saw one of them move. It turned, slowly, following me as I walked. I told myself it was just motion activated, that it was not a big deal, but something about it made my skin crawl. I made it home eventually. Barely. I was hypothermic by the time I got inside. My mother took one look at me, and her anger turned to panic. She wrapped me in blankets, made me drink hot tea, and monitored my temperature for hours. I was okay eventually, but it took days for me to stop shaking, for the feeling to come back into my fingers and toes. And even after I recovered physically, I could not stop thinking about those cameras. About the way one of them had moved, tracking me as I walked by. Over the next few weeks I started noticing Mike more. His house was between mine and Charlie's, so I passed it every time I walked to see my friend. And every single time, without fail, the cameras would track me. It did not matter what time of day it was, what the weather was like, those cameras would turn and follow me as I walked past. At first I tried to tell myself it was just a security feature, that it was normal. But then I started to notice other things. Like the fact that Mike seemed to be outside a lot more than usual. I would see him standing in his driveway or working in his yard, always watching as I walked by. He never said anything, never waved, just watched. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it. I had enough going on with school and dealing with the aftermath of my near hypothermia experience. But then things started to escalate. It was early December and I was walking home from Charlie's house one evening. It was dark, probably around 10 or 11 at night. The road was empty and the only sound was the wind howling through the trees. As I approached Mike's house, I saw him standing at the end of his driveway. He was just standing there, staring at me. I quickened my pace, keeping my eyes down, trying to ignore him. But as I got closer, he stepped into the road, blocking my path. I stopped, my heart pounding. He did not say anything at first, just stood there looking at me. And then he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was cold, calculating, like he knew something I did not. He said, "You walk past here a lot, do you not?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He said, "You should be more careful. It is dangerous out here at night. Lots of things can happen to a girl alone in the dark." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I mumbled something about needing to get home and tried to step around him, but he did not move. He just kept smiling, kept staring. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped aside and let me pass. I practically ran the rest of the way home. After that night, I tried to avoid walking past his house. I would take the long way home, even if it added an extra 20 minutes to my walk. But it did not matter. Mike started showing up in other places. I would see him at the gas station in town or at the grocery store, always watching me. And the cameras on his property started to feel more invasive, more deliberate. I told my parents about it, but they brushed it off. They said Mike was just a weird guy, that I was overreacting. But I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. The real turning point came in late December. My family had a tradition of spending Christmas at a cabin we owned deeper in the woods, about an hour's drive from our house. It was a small cabin, nothing fancy, but it was isolated and peaceful, and we loved it. We had been going there every Christmas for as long as I could remember. That year, we arrived at the cabin on December 23rd. The snow was coming down hard, and the forecast was calling for a blizzard over the next few days. My father said it was perfect, that we would be snowed in and could just relax and enjoy the holidays. The cabin was exactly as we had left it the year before. Small, cozy, with a fireplace and enough supplies to last us through the storm. We settled in quickly, unpacked our things, and started preparing for Christmas. That first night, we had a fire going. We were drinking hot chocolate, and everything felt normal. But then, around midnight, I went outside for some air. I stepped onto the porch and lit a cigarette, something I had started doing in secret a few months earlier. I was just standing there, looking out at the snow-covered trees, when I saw something move in the woods. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. But then I saw the shape more clearly. It was a person. A man standing about 50 feet away, just at the edge of the tree line. He was not moving, just standing there, watching the cabin. My heart started to race. I squinted, trying to see his face, and that is when I recognized him. It was Mike. I do not know how he found us, how he knew we were there, but it was him. I was sure of it. I screamed, dropped my cigarette, and ran back inside. I told my parents what I had seen, and my father grabbed his rifle and went outside to check. He was gone for about 15 minutes, and when he came back, he said he had chased someone through the woods, someone who had been watching the cabin. He said he did not get a good look at them, but they ran when he shouted. My father called the police, but they said there was not much they could do. The blizzard was getting worse, and they could not send anyone out until the roads cleared. They told us to lock the doors, keep the rifle handy, and call back if anything else happened. We did our best to stay calm, but the rest of the night was tense. We locked every door and window, kept the lights on, and took turns keeping watch. The snow kept falling heavy and relentless, and by morning, we were completely snowed in. The roads were impassable, and we had no way to leave. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. We stayed inside, tried to celebrate Christmas as best we could, but the fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. And then, on the night of December 25th, I saw him again. I was looking out the window, watching the snow fall, when I saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. It was the same spot as before, and it was definitely Mike. He was just standing there, watching the cabin. I called my father, and he grabbed the rifle and went outside again. This time, he did not come back right away. He was gone for almost half an hour, and when he finally returned, he looked shaken. He said he had chased the man deeper into the woods, but he lost him in the snow. He said the man knew the area, knew how to move through the trees without being seen. That night, we decided we needed to leave as soon as the roads cleared. My mother was terrified, and my father was angry. He said he was going to report Mike to the police, get a restraining order, do whatever it took to keep him away from us. But we had to wait. The blizzard did not let up until December 27th, and even then, the roads were barely passable. We packed up the cabin as quickly as we could and drove home, grateful to be leaving that place behind. When we got back to our house, my father went straight to the police station. He filed a report, told them everything that had happened, and demanded that they do something about Mike. The police said they would look into it, but they needed evidence. They needed proof that Mike had been at the cabin, that he had been stalking us. My father said he would get them proof. He installed security cameras around our house, started documenting every time he saw Mike near our property, and kept a detailed log of every interaction. It took weeks, but eventually the police had enough to question Mike. They went to his house, searched his property, and found something that made my blood run cold. They found pictures. Hundreds of them. Pictures of me, taken from his cameras, printed out and organized in folders. Pictures of me walking to Charlie's house, pictures of me at the grocery store, pictures of me at school. Some of them were taken from his property, but others were taken from places I did not even know he had been. The police also found maps. Maps of our house, maps of the cabin, maps of the routes I took when I walked through the woods. They arrested him on the spot. He was charged with stalking, harassment, and trespassing, among other things. The trial took months, but eventually Mike was convicted. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The police told us that we were not the first people he had done this to. There were other victims, other families he had targeted over the years. Some of them had restraining orders against him, but he always found ways around them. The police said he was obsessed with the idea of control, of watching people without them knowing. He used the cameras as a way to feel powerful, to feel like he had some kind of dominance over the people around him. It has been 7 years since all of this happened. Mike is still in prison, but he is eligible for parole next year. I have a notification set up that will alert me when he is released, because I know people like him do not just stop. They do not change. They do not get better. They just get better at hiding. I have moved away from Montana, gone to college, tried to build a life for myself, far away from that place. But I still think about it sometimes. I still think about those cameras, about the way they followed me as I walked past. I still think about the way he smiled that night on the road, the way he stood there in the snow outside the cabin, watching us. The worst part was not the fear, though. It was the loss of something I used to take for granted. I used to love winter. I used to love the snow, the quiet, the beauty of it all. But now, every time it snows, every time the temperature drops, I feel that same cold dread I felt that day I walked home soaking wet. I feel like someone is watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. I check my locks 3 times before bed. I look over my shoulder when I am walking alone. I trust no one, and I will never, ever take a shortcut through someone's property again, no matter how cold it is outside. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone is watching you, do not brush it off as paranoia. Document it, report it, do whatever you have to do to protect yourself. Because people like Mike are out there, and they are patient. They will wait, they will watch, and they will strike when you least expect it. And sometimes, the cold is not the most dangerous thing you have to worry about. I want to make something clear before I tell you this story. Ghosts are real. I do not care if you believe me or not. I do not care if you think I am crazy or making this up for attention. I am telling you that ghosts are real, and I know this because one has been haunting me for 3 years, ever since the night I killed my best friend. My name is Lauren, and I am 23 years old. 3 years ago, when I was 20, I was a junior at a university in Connecticut. I had a close group of friends, 5 of us who did everything together. We had known each other since freshman year, lived in the same dorm, went to the same parties, studied together, stayed up late talking about our dreams and fears. We were inseparable. The 5 of us were me, Mercedes, who was the rich girl with the nice car and the perfect life, Lindsay, who was quiet and anxious but loyal, Kayla, who was studying to be a nurse and always took care of us, and Julia. Julia was my best friend. The person I told everything to. The person who knew me better than anyone else in the world. Julia and I had been close since we were kids. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, did everything together. When we both got into the same university, it felt like fate. We were going to conquer college together, graduate together, be in each other's weddings, raise our kids together. We had our whole lives planned out. And then, in one night, all of that was destroyed. Because of me. It happened on Halloween night, October 31st, 2021. We were at a party at Mercedes' house. Her parents were out of town, and she had invited everyone over to celebrate Halloween. We were all drinking. Not just a little, but a lot. Mercedes had made jungle juice. That terrible mixture of grain, alcohol, and juice that tastes like nothing but hits you like a truck. We had been drinking since 7 in the evening, and by 11, we were all completely wasted. Drunk to the point where we could barely stand, could barely think, could barely speak. At some point during the night, someone suggested we use a Ouija board. I do not remember who suggested it, but I remember Julia being excited about it. She loved that kind of stuff. Ghost stories, horror movies, anything supernatural. She thought it would be fun. So Mercedes got out an old Ouija board she had in her closet, and we all sat around it in the living room, giggling and stumbling and putting our hands on the planchette. We asked stupid questions. Is there anyone here? Do you have a message for us? What is your name? The planchette moved a little, probably because someone was pushing it, and we all screamed and laughed like it was the scariest thing we had ever seen. It was silly, harmless, just drunk college kids playing with a board game. But then, someone asked a different question. Someone asked if anyone in the room was going to die soon, and the planchette moved to yes. We all froze. Mercedes asked who. The planchette started moving, spelling out letters. Julia. Julia. It spelled Julia. We all looked at her. She was pale, her eyes wide, and she looked genuinely scared. Someone, I think it was Lindsay, said it was just a joke, that someone was moving it on purpose to scare her. But Julia did not laugh. She just stared at the board, and then she said she wanted to go home. She said she did not feel well, that the alcohol was making her sick, that she needed to leave. I should have let her go. I should have called her an Uber, or let her crash at Mercedes' house, or done anything other than what I did. But I was drunk. Too drunk to make good decisions. And Julia said she was fine to drive. She said she only had a few drinks, that she was more sober than the rest of us, that she would be okay. And I believed her, because I wanted to believe her, because staying at the party and drinking more sounded better than dealing with the responsibility of making sure she got home safe. So, I let her leave. I watched her walk out the door, get into her car, and drive away. And that was the last time I saw her alive. The police came to Mercedes' house at 3 in the morning. They said there had been an accident. Julia had been driving on the highway, going too fast, weaving between lanes. She lost control of her car, swerved into oncoming traffic, and collided head-on with a semi-truck. She died instantly. The impact was so severe that they had to identify her body through dental records. The police said her blood alcohol content was 0.18, more than twice the legal limit. She had been driving drunk, and I had let her. The funeral was a week later. It was November, cold and gray, with snow just starting to fall. Her parents asked me to speak, to say something about their daughter, my best friend. But I could not. I could not stand up in front of everyone and talk about Julia when I knew that her death was my fault. If I had stopped her from driving, if I had taken her keys, if I had done anything other than watch her leave, she would still be alive. But I did not, and now she was gone. After the funeral, I started having nightmares. Dreams where Julia was standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me, her face pale and her eyes empty. Dreams where she was in the car, the moment before the crash, screaming my name, asking why I let her drive, asking why I did not save her. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, unable to go back to sleep. The nightmares happened every night for weeks. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I stopped going to class. I just stayed in my dorm room, alone, consumed by guilt. The others were dealing with it too, but in different ways. Mercedes threw herself into partying, drinking even more, trying to forget. Lindsay went to therapy, took medication for her anxiety, tried to process the trauma. Kayla threw herself into her studies, volunteered at hospitals, tried to do good to make up for what happened. But none of them seemed to feel the guilt the way I did. None of them seemed to be haunted the way I was. Because Julia was my best friend, and I had failed her. One night, about a month after the funeral, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, and I heard a voice, a whisper, soft and distant, but clear. It said my name, Lauren. I sat up, looked around the room. There was no one there. I thought I was imagining it, that the lack of sleep was making me hallucinate. But then I heard it again. Lauren, louder this time, coming from the corner of the room near my closet. I turned on the light, and there, standing in the corner, was Julia. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing at the party. Her hair was wet, matted with blood. Her face was pale, her lips blue, and she was staring at me. Just staring. Not moving, not speaking, just staring. I screamed. I jumped out of bed, ran to the door, threw it open, and ran down the hallway. But when I looked back, she was gone. I stood there shaking, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it, that it was just a nightmare, that it was not real. But I knew it was real. I knew what I had seen. Julia was haunting me. After that night, the hauntings became more frequent. I would see her everywhere. In the library, standing between the shelves, watching me. In the cafeteria, sitting at a table across the room, her eyes following me. In my dorm room, standing at the foot of my bed, silent and still. She never spoke. She just watched. And every time I saw her, I felt the same crushing guilt, the same overwhelming terror. I tried to tell the others, but they did not believe me. They said I was having a breakdown, that I needed to see a therapist, that I was processing my grief in an unhealthy way. But I knew what I was seeing. I knew Julia was there. I started researching hauntings, ghosts, how to communicate with the dead. I read about Ouija boards, seances, mediums, all the ways people try to contact spirits. And I thought maybe if I could talk to Julia, if I could apologize, if I could tell her how sorry I was, she would forgive me. She would stop haunting me. She would move on. So, on the anniversary of her death, Halloween night, 2022, exactly 1 year after the party, I convinced the others to do a seance. I told them we needed to talk to Julia, to apologize, to make things right. Mercedes was skeptical, but she agreed. Lindsay was terrified, but she came anyway. Kayla said it was a bad idea, but she wanted closure too. So the four of us gathered at Mercedes' house, the same place we had been the night Julia died, and we set up the Ouija board. We sat in a circle, put our hands on the planchette, and asked if Julia was there. The planchette moved immediately. Yes. We asked if she could hear us. Yes. We asked if she was in pain. Yes. And then, before we could ask anything else, the planchette started moving on its own, spelling out words without any of us guiding it. BLUEROSES, blue roses. I froze. Blue roses were Julia's favorite. When we were kids, we used to put food coloring in water to change the color of flowers, and Julia always wanted blue roses. They were her favorite thing. And after she died, I brought a bouquet of blue roses to her grave. We asked her if there was anything we could do. The planchette moved again. DIE, die. She wanted us to die. I pulled my hands away from the board, my heart racing. Mercedes said it was just a prank, that someone was moving it, that Julia would never say something like that. But I knew better. I knew Julia was angry. She was angry because we let her drive drunk. She was angry because we did not stop her. She was angry because we killed her. I asked her if she forgave us. The planchette moved. And oh no, she did not forgive us. And she never would. Mercedes tried to end the seance, tried to say goodbye, but the planchette would not move. It stayed frozen in place, no matter how hard we tried to move it. And then, all at once, every light in the house went out. We were plunged into darkness. I heard Mercedes scream. I heard Lindsay crying. I heard something moving in the dark, footsteps, breathing, getting closer. And then I felt it. A cold hand on my shoulder, fingers digging into my skin, and a voice, Julia's voice, whispering in my ear, "You let me die. You let me drive. This is your fault." I ran. I do not remember how I got out of the house, but I did. I ran down the street, got in my car, and drove. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, just trying to get away. But I could not escape, because Julia was in the car with me. I could see her in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat, staring at me. I swerved, nearly crashed, pulled over on the side of the road. And when I looked in the mirror again, she was gone. After that night, the hauntings got worse. Julia was everywhere. In my apartment, in my car, at my job. I could not escape her. I started drinking to numb the fear, to forget the guilt. I lost my job. I dropped out of school. I isolated myself from everyone, including the others. Mercedes stopped returning my calls. Lindsay moved to a different state. Kayla graduated and went to medical school. They all moved on. But I could not, because Julia would not let me. I tried everything to make it stop. I went to mediums who told me Julia's spirit was trapped, angry, unable to move on. I went to priests who tried to bless my apartment, to exorcise the ghost. Nothing works. Julia was still there, still watching, still reminding me of what I had done. I learned about survivor guilt, the psychological phenomenon where people who survive a traumatic event feel guilty for living when others did not. It is common among survivors of accidents, disasters, violent crimes. They blame themselves, even when the event was not their fault. They struggle with depression, anxiety, PTSD. Some turn to substance abuse. Some take their own lives. I learned that survivor guilt is especially common among drunk driving survivors. People who were in the car when someone else was driving drunk, who survived when the driver or other passengers did not. They blame themselves for not stopping the driver, for getting in the car in the first place, for living when their friends died. I read about a case from 2023. A woman named Elizondo was 10 weeks pregnant when she was hit by a drunk driver. She survived, but she had 6 rib fractures, 9 dental fractures, a broken leg, a broken hand, a 6-inch laceration to her head, and lacerations to her kidney, liver, and spleen. Her baby was not expected to survive, but she did, though she has numerous disabilities. Elizondo had to go to physical therapy for months. Her baby will need therapy for the rest of her life. But Elizondo said she forgave the driver. She said, "I forgive you, and Jesus forgives you too." I read about Sarah Italian, a college freshman who was in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. The car caught fire. 49% of her body was burned. All 10 of her fingers were amputated. Her friend who was driving died. Sarah considers herself the lucky one. She said, "I remember people screaming and I was crying for my mom. And because the door was burnt shut and I was stuck in my seatbelt, they had to pull me out from the back seat." I read about 2 14-year-old boys, Drew Hassan, B.N. and Ethan Falkowitz, who were killed in May of 2023 when a drunk driver drove the wrong way and crashed into their car. They were on their way home from a tennis match, celebrating a victory. The driver, Amandeep Singh, had a blood alcohol level of 0.8, more than twice the legal limit. 2 other teens in the car survived, but were injured. The families of Drew and Ethan will never see them graduate, never see them get married, never see them have children. All because of one person's decision to drive drunk. And I thought about Julia, about how her parents would never see her graduate, about how I would never be in her wedding, about how her whole future was taken away because I let her drive drunk, because I was too selfish, too drunk, too irresponsible to stop her. It has been 3 years since Julia died. 3 years of nightmares, hauntings, guilt. I am sober now. I have been for 2 years. I go to AA meetings, I have a sponsor, I work the steps. I have apologized to Julia's parents, though they do not forgive me. I have tried to make amends, to do better, to live in a way that honors Julia's memory. But nothing I do will bring her back. Nothing I do will erase what happened. And Julia's ghost is still here, still watching, still reminding me. Last night, I saw her again. It was late, around midnight, and I was in my apartment, reading before bed. And I felt that familiar cold presence, the feeling of being watched. I looked up, and she was standing in the doorway, just like always. But this time, she was different. Her face was not angry. It was sad. She looked at me, and for the first time in 3 years, she spoke. She said, "I am tired, Lauren. I am so tired." And then, she was gone. I do not know what that means. I do not know if it means she is ready to move on, or if it means something else. But I think maybe she is tired of being angry. Maybe she is tired of haunting me. Maybe she wants to rest. I am writing this story because I need people to understand something. Drunk driving does not just kill people. It destroys families. It destroys friendships. It destroys the people who survive. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 37 people die every day in drunk driving crashes in the United States. That is over 13,000 deaths per year. And for every person who dies, there are dozens more who are left behind to deal with the guilt, the grief, the trauma. Parents who lose children, children who lose parents, friends who lose friends, survivors who spend the rest of their lives wishing they had done something different. In 2023, there were over 13,842 deaths in alcohol-impaired driving crashes. That is 38% of all traffic fatalities. And those numbers do not include the people who are injured but survive, who live with permanent disabilities, chronic pain, PTSD. The victims of driving crashes suffer in ways that statistics cannot capture. They lose limbs, suffer burns, endure months or years of physical therapy, struggle with mental health issues. Their lives are forever changed. And the people who cause these crashes suffer too. I have read stories from drunk drivers who killed someone, who are serving time in prison, who live with the knowledge that they took someone's life. They describe profound guilt, suicidal thoughts, knowing that their suffering pales in comparison to that of the victims and families. They describe feeling like they will never be able to make amends, never be able to earn redemption, never be able to forgive themselves. They serve their sentences, but the real punishment is the guilt they carry for the rest of their lives. Julia was 20 years old when she died. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was studying to be a teacher. She wanted to work with kids, to make a difference in the world. She was kind, funny, caring, the kind of person who made everyone around her feel special. And now she is gone, because of a stupid decision. Because we were young and drunk, and thought we were invincible. Because I did not stop her. I do not know if Julia's ghost is real, or if it is just my guilt manifesting as hallucinations. I do not know if what I see is her spirit, or if it is my brain punishing me for what I did. But it does not matter. Real or not, I am haunted. And I will be haunted for the rest of my life. If you are reading this, and you're at a party, and your friend says they are fine to drive, please do not believe them. Please take their keys. Please call them an Uber. Please make them stay. Because if you do not, you will spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved them. You will see their face every time you close your eyes. You will hear their voice in the silence. And you will be haunted, whether by their ghost or by your own guilt, for as long as you live. Julia deserved better. She deserved to live. She deserved to graduate, to get married, to have children, to grow old. She deserved all the things that were taken from her. And I have to live with the knowledge that I could have saved her, and I did not. The blue roses on her grave are wilted now. I bring new ones every week. I sit there at her headstone and I tell her I am sorry. I tell her I miss her. I tell her I wish I could go back and change everything. And sometimes, when the wind blows, I feel like she is there with me. Not angry anymore. Just sad. Just tired. Just waiting for something I cannot give her. Forgiveness. Peace. A second chance. But there are no second chances. There is only this. This guilt. This grief. This haunting. And the knowledge that one decision, one moment, one terrible choice can destroy everything, can take a life, can ruin others, can create a ghost that will never rest. I am telling you this story because maybe if I can stop even one person from making the same mistake I did, Julia's death will mean something. Maybe if I can save even one life, I can find some kind of redemption. Maybe if I can carry this burden and use it to protect others, Julia will finally be able to move on, to rest, to stop haunting me. But until then, I will see her everywhere. In the shadows. In the mirror. In the back seat of my car. A reminder of what I did. A reminder of who I lost. A reminder that some ghosts are real. And some hauntings never end. If you drink, do not drive. If your friends drink, do not let them drive. Call an Uber. Call a cab. Walk. Sleep it off. Do anything except get behind the wheel. Because the cost of that decision is not just your life. It is the lives of everyone you might hurt. It is the lives of everyone who loves you. It is the lives of everyone who will spend the rest of their days wishing they had stopped you. Julia is dead because I did not stop her. And I am haunted because I have to live with that. Do not make the same mistake. Do not let your friend drive drunk. Do not become a ghost. Do not create one. The blue roses on her grave are all I have left of her now. That, and the guilt, and the haunting, and the knowledge that I killed my best friend. And no amount of time, no amount of sobriety, no amount of amends will ever change that. She is gone, and I am still here, and I do not know which one of us got the worse fate. I spent years convincing myself that what happened to me was not that bad, that I had misunderstood, that I was overreacting. I told myself these things because that is what everyone else told me when I tried to speak up. But I know now that I was not wrong. I know now that what happened to me was calculated, deliberate, and part of a pattern. And I know that if I had trusted my instincts instead of the adults who told me to ignore them, I might have saved myself years of trauma. My name is Emily, and when I was 14 years old, my 8th grade history teacher groomed me. His name was Mr. Daniel Carter, and to everyone else in my school, he was one of the good ones. Popular with students, respected by parents, awarded Teacher of the Month multiple times. He coached the debate team, volunteered at school events, stayed late to help students with homework. He was 42 years old, married with 2 young children, and he seemed like the kind of teacher every school needed more of. But behind that carefully constructed image was a predator who knew exactly how to identify vulnerable targets, isolate them, and manipulate them into silence. This happened during the winter of 2018, in a small town in upstate New York called Ithaca. I was in my 2nd year of middle school, struggling with math and science, but excelling in history and English. My parents had recently divorced, and I was living with my mother in a cramped apartment near the school. Money was tight. My mother worked 2 jobs, and I spent a lot of time alone. I was the kind of kid who slipped through the cracks, quiet, self-sufficient, trying not to be a burden. Looking back now, I realize that is exactly the kind of kid predators look for. Mr. Carter taught 3 of my classes that year. I had him for homeroom, American history, and geography. That meant I saw him first thing in the morning, in the middle of the day, and right before school ended. He was in his element in the classroom, funny, engaging. The kind of teacher who made you want to pay attention. He told stories about historical figures like they were his personal friends, acted out battles and political debates, made us feel like we were there. I loved his classes. I looked forward to them, and he noticed. It started with small things. He would call on me more often than other students, ask for my opinion, praise my answers. He would keep me after class for a minute or 2 to tell me I had done a good job on an assignment, or to ask how I was doing, if everything was okay at home. At first, I thought he was just being nice. I thought he cared. And maybe part of him did, in his own twisted way. But what I did not understand then was that he was studying me, learning my routines, my vulnerabilities, my boundaries, figuring out how far he could push before I would push back. The attention escalated slowly. He started complimenting me on things that had nothing to do with schoolwork. He said I was mature for my age, that I understood things other kids my age did not, that I was special. He said I reminded him of someone he knew when he was younger, someone he had cared about very much. He said these things with a warmth in his voice that made me feel seen, valued, important. No one else in my life was paying that kind of attention to me. My mother was exhausted all the time. My friends were caught up in their own drama, and I was lonely. So when Mr. Carter told me I was special, I believed him. One day in late November, he asked me to stay after class. He said he wanted to talk to me about my last essay, that he had some suggestions for how I could improve my writing. I stayed, and we talked for maybe 10 minutes about the Revolutionary War and how to structure an argument. But then, as I was about to leave, he put his hand on my shoulder. It was not a threatening gesture, not overtly inappropriate. Just a hand on my shoulder, a brief touch, a second too long. But it made me uncomfortable in a way I could not articulate. When I got home, I told myself I was being ridiculous. He was just being friendly. That is what teachers do. But the touches continued. A hand on my shoulder became a hand on my back. A pat on the arm became fingers brushing against mine when he handed me papers. He would stand too close when he talked to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. And every time, I would freeze. I did not know how to tell him to stop without seeming rude or ungrateful. So, I said nothing. In early December, he started asking me to stay after school for extra help. He said my grades were slipping in geography, that he wanted to make sure I stayed on track. This was a lie. My geography grades were fine, but I did not know that at the time, so I agreed. The sessions were always one-on-one, just me and him in his classroom after everyone else had gone home. He would pull a chair up next to mine, sit so close our knees were almost touching, and go over maps and timelines. And the whole time, he would talk to me. Not about geography, about me, about my home life, my parents' divorce, how I was feeling, if I had anyone to talk to. He made me feel like he was the only person who understood me, the only person who cared. And slowly, I started to trust him. That is when he started crossing bigger boundaries. He would brush my hair out of my face, tuck it behind my ear. He would put his hand on my knee when he was explaining something, leave it there just a little too long. He started texting me on weekends, asking how I was doing, what I was up to, if I wanted to talk. The messages were always framed as concern, as mentorship, but there was an undertone that made me uneasy. He would say things like, "You are so much more mature than other girls your age," or "I feel like I can talk to you in a way I cannot talk to other students." He was making me feel complicit, making me feel like I was part of something special, something secret, and I did not realize until much later that this was grooming. The breaking point came in mid-January. There was a massive snowstorm forecasted for our area, one of those once-in-a-decade blizzards that shut everything down. The school sent out notices that we might have to close for a few days, that parents should prepare for extended power outages and travel restrictions. My mother had to work a double shift at the hospital that day, and I was going to be home alone. Mr. Carter knew this because I had mentioned it to him during one of our after-school sessions, and he used that information. On the day of the storm, school was supposed to close early, but Mr. Carter asked me to stay for an extra help session before I left. He said it was important, that we were behind schedule, that he wanted to make sure I understood the material before the break. I agreed, even though something in my gut told me not to. I texted my mother that I would be staying late, that Mr. Carter was helping me with my work. She said, "Okay, be safe. Get home before the roads get too bad." The session started normally. We were in his classroom, the door closed, going over a timeline of the Civil War. But about 20 minutes in, the power went out. The backup generator kicked in, but it only powered the emergency lights in the hallways, not the classrooms. We were sitting in the dark, just the two of us, and I remember feeling my heart start to race. Mr. Carter stood up, said he would go check on the situation, see if we needed to evacuate. But when he came back, he said the roads were already too dangerous to drive on, that the school was going into lockdown mode, that we were going to have to wait out the storm. I should have left. I should have called my mother, insisted on leaving, done anything other than stay. But I did not. I stayed because Mr. Carter told me it was safer. because he said he would take care of me, because I trusted him. And that trust almost cost me everything. We moved to the teacher's lounge, where there was a small heater and some emergency supplies. Mr. Carter made hot chocolate, found some blankets, tried to make the situation seem cozy, safe. But the whole time he kept getting closer. He sat next to me on the couch, put his arm around me to keep me warm, told me not to worry, that everything would be okay. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I have been wanting to be alone with you like this for a long time." I froze. I did not know what to say, what to do. He started touching my hair, my face, telling me how special I was, how much he cared about me, how he had feelings for me that he could not ignore. I remember feeling like I was going to be sick. I remember pulling away from him, standing up, saying I needed to call my mother. And that is when his demeanor changed. He grabbed my wrist, not hard, but firm enough to make it clear that I was not leaving. He said I was overreacting, that I was misunderstanding, that he was just trying to keep me warm. He said if I told anyone about this, no one would believe me. He said I had been encouraging him, that I had wanted this, that I had no proof of anything inappropriate. I do not remember how I got out of that room. I know I pulled my arm away, grabbed my bag, and ran. I ran through the dark hallways, out the front doors into the blizzard. The snow was already a foot deep, the wind was howling, and I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. But I did not care. I just ran. I ran until I found a gas station about half a mile from the school, and I called my mother. She picked me up 20 minutes later and I told her everything. My mother believed me. That is the most important part of this story. She believed me, and she acted. She called the principal that night, filed a police report the next morning, and demanded that Mr. Carter be investigated. But the response from the school was not what we expected. The principal said there was no evidence of wrongdoing, that Mr. Carter had a spotless record, that I must have misunderstood his intentions. Other teachers rallied around him, said he was a good man, a family man, that he would never do something like that. Even some of my classmates turned on me, said I was lying for attention, that I had a crush on Mr. Carter, and was making things up because he rejected me. The rumor mill at school was vicious. I became the girl who accused a beloved teacher of something terrible, and no one wanted to be associated with me. But my mother did not give up. She hired a lawyer, demanded access to Mr. Carter's phone records, his email, his social media, and what they found was damning. Text messages to me that crossed professional boundaries, emails to other female students with similar content, photos of students saved on his personal devices, a pattern of behavior that went back years. It turned out I was not the first girl he had targeted. I was just the first one whose parent believed her enough to fight back. The investigation took months. During that time, Mr. Carter was placed on administrative leave, but he was still getting paid, still living his normal life. Meanwhile, I was in therapy, struggling with anxiety and depression, unable to go back to that school. My mother ended up pulling me out and homeschooling me for the rest of the year. The isolation was crushing. I lost all my friends, my routine, my sense of normalcy. And all the while, Mr. Carter was walking around free, telling people I was a troubled kid who had fabricated a story to get attention. But in the end, the evidence was too strong to ignore. The district attorney charged him with multiple counts of endangering the welfare of a child and attempted sexual abuse. During the investigation, 3 other former students came forward with similar stories. Girls who had been in his classes years before, who had experienced the same grooming behaviors, the same boundary violations, the same manipulation. One girl said he had kept a photo of her in his wallet, told her she was his favorite, took her on private tutoring sessions that made her uncomfortable. Another said he had messaged her on social media after she graduated, tried to meet up with her, told her he had been waiting for her to turn 18. The pattern was undeniable. In the spring of 2019, Mr. Carter pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison and required to register as a sex offender. 8 years for destroying the trust of countless students, for preying on vulnerable children, for using his position of authority to manipulate and abuse. It did not feel like enough. It still does not. I learned a lot during the trial and the investigation. I learned that teachers' sexual misconduct is far more common than most people realize. According to research by Dr. Charles Shakeshaft, one of the leading experts on this topic, about 10% of students experience some form of sexual misconduct by a school employee before they graduate. That is 1 in 10 children. And the vast majority of cases go unreported because victims are afraid they will not be believed, or because they do not even realize they have been victimized. Grooming is insidious that way. It makes you feel complicit, makes you question your own perception of reality. I also learn about the specific tactics that predators use. They choose victims who are isolated, vulnerable, easy to control. They build trust slowly, crossing boundaries incrementally so. The victim does not recognize what is happening until it is too late. They use gifts, attention, and emotional manipulation to create a sense of indebtedness. They isolate the victim from friends and family, making themselves the only source of validation and support. And they rely on institutional protection, knowing that schools are often more concerned with their reputation than with the safety of their students. Since Mr. Carter's conviction, I have followed similar cases in the news. In Wisconsin, a year-long investigation found over 200 teachers accused of sexual misconduct or grooming between 2018 and 2023, and many of them kept their teaching licenses despite clear evidence of wrongdoing. In Oklahoma, a teacher named Serena Cater was arrested in 2023 for grooming at least 10 male students, sending explicit messages and soliciting sex. She had developed relationships with the mothers of her victims, sending them photos of their sons in class, telling them how well the boys were doing, building trust so no one would suspect her. In New York, a teacher at an elite prep school used social media to pose as a teenage boy, grooming students into sending explicit photos, and when parents raised concerns, they were dismissed as being racist or overreacting. The school protected the predator until it was too late. These stories are everywhere once you start looking for them. And the common thread in all of them is that the adults in charge, the administrators, the school boards, the other teachers, chose to protect the abuser instead of the victim. They valued their reputation, their comfort, their belief that someone they knew and trusted could not possibly be a monster. But predators do not look like monsters. They look like Mr. Carter. They look like beloved teachers, respected coaches, trusted mentors. They are charming, likable, good at their jobs. That is how they get away with it. It has been 7 years since everything happened. I'm 21 now, in college, studying psychology because I want to understand how people like Mr. Carter operate and how we can stop them. I am in therapy, working through the trauma, learning to trust people again. But there are still days when I see a teacher standing too close to a student, or hear about someone getting unsolicited messages from an authority figure, and I feel that same sick feeling I felt in that dark classroom during the blizzard. That same fear, that same helplessness. I think about that winter a lot. I think about how the storm isolated me, how Mr. Carter used that isolation to his advantage, how close I came to something much worse. I think about the other girls who were not as lucky as I was, who did not have a mother who believed them, who did not have evidence to back up their story. I think about the girls who are still out there, being groomed by teachers who know exactly how to avoid detection, who know exactly what to say to make them feel like they are the problem. If you are reading this, and you recognize these warning signs in your own life, please listen to your instincts. If a teacher is giving you too much attention, making you feel special in a way that feels uncomfortable, touching you in ways that make your skin crawl, isolating you from your friends, messaging you outside of school hours, telling you that you are more mature than other students, your age, These are not signs of a caring mentor. These are signs of grooming. And you deserve better. Tell someone. Tell your parents. Tell another teacher. Tell a school counselor. Tell a friend's parent. Keep telling until someone believes you. Document everything. Save messages. Write down what happened, when it happened, who else was there. Build a paper trail. Because predators rely on your silence, on your fear that no one will believe you. They rely on the fact that they are more respected, more trusted, more credible than you are. Do not let them win. And if you are a parent, please pay attention. Ask your child about their teachers, about who they are spending time with, about any adult who seems to be taking an unusual interest in them. Look for red flags. Excessive gifts, private communication, one-on-one meetings that are not necessary or appropriate, physical touch that seems too familiar. Trust your instincts, and trust your child. Because the cost of being wrong is so much higher than the cost of asking uncomfortable questions. Mr. Carter gets out of prison next year. I have a notification set up that will alert me when he is released. I know he will probably try to teach again, maybe in a different state, maybe under a different name. I know that people like him do not change, that they just get better at hiding, and that terrifies me. But I also know that I survived him, that I spoke up, that I fought back, that I refused to let him silence me. And if my story can help even one person recognize the signs of grooming, can help even one child avoid what I went through, then maybe all of this pain will have been worth something. Winter still makes me uneasy. When I see snow falling, when I feel that cold wind, I am transported back to that classroom, to that moment when I realized the person I trusted most was the person I should have feared. But I am not that scared 14-year-old anymore. I am stronger now, wiser, more aware. And I will keep telling my story, keep fighting for other victims, keep pushing for a world where predators like Mr. Carter are stopped before they can destroy more lives. Trust yourself. Believe survivors. Protect children, because no one should ever have to go through what I went through. I need to tell you something that happened to me during the winter of 2017. I have a degree in engineering. I work for a tech company, and I have spent my entire adult life solving problems with logic and reason. But what happened to me on that December night defied every rational explanation I have ever known. And even now, 10 years later, I still do not know what I encountered in those woods. I just know that it was not human, and that I am lucky to be alive. My name is Thomas, and at the time of this story, I was 26 years old, working as a software engineer for a startup company in Burlington, Vermont. The job was demanding, the hours were long, and the pay was terrible, but I needed the experience. I was living in a small town called Bennington, about 2 hours south of Burlington, commuting by train 3 days a week. It was exhausting, but I could not afford to live in the city, and the company did not offer remote work at the time. December in Vermont is brutal. The temperatures drop well below zero, the snow comes in waves, and the sun sets by 4 in the afternoon. I hated the commute during those months, especially the late train home. I would leave the office around 9 at night, take the last train south, and arrive at the Bennington station around midnight. From there, it was a 15-minute walk to my apartment, through quiet streets that felt abandoned in the winter darkness. On December 15th, 2017, I worked later than usual. We were trying to meet a deadline for a client, and I ended up staying at the office until 10:30. I knew I was going to miss the last train, but I did not have a choice. I grabbed my coat, rushed to the station, and got there just as the train was pulling away. I watched it disappear into the darkness, and I felt my stomach drop. I was stranded in Burlington with no way to get home. I checked my phone. There were no buses running that late, no rideshare drivers available, and I did not have enough money for a hotel. My apartment was 80 miles south. I could not walk that far, especially not in the freezing cold. I sat down on a bench at the station, trying to figure out what to do. That is when I saw him. A man, maybe in his 30s, standing near the edge of the platform. He was wearing a long, dark coat, and he was staring at me. When I looked at him, he walked over. He asked where I was going. I told him Bennington. He smiled, said he was going to the same area, that his car was parked nearby, and that he could give me a ride. I hesitated. I did not know this man, and every instinct in my body told me not to trust him. But I was desperate, and I did not see any other option. So I said yes. I followed him to his car, a beat-up sedan parked in a lot near the station. We got in, and he started driving south. At first, the drive seemed normal. We made small talk, the kind of polite conversation you have with strangers. He told me his name was Daniel, that he worked in construction, that he lived in a small town near Bennington. I told him about my job, my commute, how much I hated working late. He listened, nodded, asked questions. But there was something off about him. Something I could not quite place. The way he looked at me when he thought I was not paying attention. The way he smiled, like he knew something I did not. We had been driving for maybe 30 minutes when he took an exit I did not recognize. I asked where we were going. He said it was a shortcut, that the main highway was closed due to snow. I checked my phone. No signal. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest on both sides of the road. I started to feel uneasy. I asked him to take me back to the highway, to just drop me off at the next town. He did not respond. He just kept driving. The road got narrower, darker. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches hanging low over the road. Snow started to fall, heavy and fast. I could barely see 10 feet ahead of us. I told him again that I wanted to get out, that I would walk the rest of the way. He looked at me, and his expression changed. He was not smiling anymore. He said, "We are almost there." I asked him, "Almost where?" He did not answer. Then the car stopped. We were in the middle of the forest, on a dirt road that looked like it had not been used in years. He turned off the engine. I asked him what he was doing. He said, "I need to show you something." I told him I did not want to see anything, that I just wanted to go home. He opened his door and got out. I stayed in the car, my hand on the door handle, ready to run. He walked around to my side, opened my door, and said, "Come on, trust me." I should have run. I should have locked the door, refused to move, done anything except follow him into those woods. But I was frozen. I do not know if it was fear or confusion or something else, but I got out of the car. He started walking into the trees, and I followed. The snow was coming down harder now, and the wind was howling through the branches. I could barely see him ahead of me. I called out, asked where we were going. He said, "Just a little further." We walked for maybe 10 minutes. The trees got thicker, the darkness got deeper. I could not see the car anymore. I could not see the road. I stopped walking. I told him I was going back. That is when I heard it. A sound, coming from somewhere in the trees. A woman crying. Not screaming, not shouting, just crying. Soft, sad, desperate. I asked Daniel if he heard it. He said yes. He said, "That is what I wanted to show you. Someone is in trouble. We need to help." I should have known then. I should have recognized the trap. But I did not. I followed the sound. We pushed deeper into the forest, the crying getting louder, closer. And then I saw her. A woman, standing under a tree about 50 feet away. She was wearing a thin dress, no coat, no shoes. She was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself. I called out to her, asked if she was okay. She did not respond. She just stood there, crying. Daniel walked toward her. I followed. But as we got closer, something changed. The crying stopped. The woman turned to look at us, and I saw her face. It was wrong. Distorted, like someone had stretched it and pulled it and reshaped it into something that was almost human, but not quite. Her eyes were too large, her mouth too wide, and when she smiled, I saw that her teeth were sharp, like needles. I froze. Daniel stopped walking. The woman started to laugh. Not a human laugh. Something else. Something ancient and cruel. And then she changed. Her body twisted, elongated, her skin rippling like water. She dropped to all fours, her limbs bending at impossible angles. Within seconds, she was not a woman anymore. She was something else. Something I do not have words for. I ran. I did not think, did not plan, just turned and ran back toward where I thought the car was. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the trees, moving fast. Too fast. I ran harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I did not look back. I just ran. And then I tripped. I fell hard, my face hitting the snow. I rolled over, and it was there, standing over me, its face inches from mine. I could smell its breath, rotten and cold. It opened its mouth, and I thought I was going to die. But then I heard a voice. Daniel. He was standing a few feet away, and he was laughing. Not scared, not surprised, just laughing. He said, "I told you I wanted to show you something." The thing above me turned to look at him, and that is when I saw it. Daniel was changing too. His face was shifting, his body contorting. He was the same as the thing on top of me. They were the same. I do not remember what happened next. I do not remember how I got away, how I found the road, how I made it back to civilization. All I remember is waking up the next morning at the Bennington train station, lying on a bench, covered in snow. My clothes were torn, my hands were bleeding, and I had no idea how I had gotten there. I checked my phone. It was dead. I walked to my apartment, showered, and tried to process what had happened. But I could not. It did not make sense. None of it made sense. I did not tell anyone. Who would believe me? I convinced myself that I had hallucinated, that I had gotten drunk or high or something and imagined the whole thing. But I knew that was not true. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. And I knew that whatever those things were, they were still out there, in those woods, waiting for the next person stupid enough to follow them. A few weeks later, I started researching. I needed to understand what had happened to me, needed to find some kind of explanation. That is when I discovered the Bennington Triangle, an area of southwestern Vermont, centered around Glastonbury Mountain, where people have been disappearing for over 100 years. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 people vanished in that area under mysterious circumstances. No bodies, no evidence, nothing. Just gone. The first was a man named Mitty Rivers, a 74-year-old hunting guide who disappeared in November of 1945. He was an experienced outdoorsman, knew the area well, but he never came back from a hunting trip. The only thing they found was a handkerchief on the trail. The second was Paula Jean Weldon, an 18-year-old college student who went for a hike on the Long Trail in December of 1946. She was seen by multiple witnesses walking into the forest in a red coat. She never came back. They launched one of the largest searches in Vermont history, over 1,000 people looking for her. They found nothing. Not her coat, not her shoes, not a single trace. The third was James Tedford, a 68-year-old veteran who vanished from a bus in December of 1949. Witnesses saw him board the bus in Burlington, heading to Bennington. He was on the bus when it left Burlington, but when it arrived in Bennington, he was gone. His luggage was still there, his seat was still warm, but he had disappeared into thin air. The fourth was an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson who vanished from a farm in October of 1950. His mother left him in the truck for 30 minutes while she fed the pigs. When she came back, he was gone. Bloodhounds tracked his scent to a road where it just stopped. No footprints, no signs of a struggle. Just gone. The fifth was a woman named Frida Langer, who disappeared in October of 1950 while hiking with her cousin. She slipped and fell into a stream, went back to their camp to change clothes, and never returned. They found her body 7 months later, in an area that had been searched multiple times. There was no explanation for how her body got there, or what had happened to her in the months she was missing. 5 people. 5 disappearances. All in the same area. All unexplained. And those are just the documented cases. There are dozens more, going back over a century. People who went into those woods and never came out. I started looking into the folklore of the area. Native Americans who lived there called it a cursed place, said there were spirits in the woods that preyed on travelers. They avoided the area, refused to hunt there, said it belonged to something else. Early settlers reported seeing strange lights in the forest, hearing voices calling to them from the trees. Loggers in the 1800s said they would find camps that had been abandoned in the middle of the night, with food still on the table and fires still burning, as if the people had just vanished mid-meal. And then I found the stories about shapeshifters. Creatures that could take human form, lure people into the woods, and then reveal their true nature. In Slavic folklore, they are called leshi, forest spirits that protect the woods and punish those who disrespect them. In Native American legends, they are called skinwalkers, witches who can transform into animals. Every culture has a version of this story. Something in the forest that is not what it seems. Something that wears a human face but hides a monster underneath. I do not know what I encountered in those woods. I do not know if it was one of these creatures or something else entirely. But I know that Daniel was not human. I know that the woman was not human. And I know that I was minutes away from becoming another name on the list of people who disappeared in the Bennington Triangle. I moved out of Vermont 3 months later. I could not stay there anymore. Every time I saw a forest, every time I heard the wind in the trees, I would remember that night. I would remember the sound of the woman crying, the way Daniel laughed, the feeling of that thing standing over me. I could not do it anymore. I live in Arizona now. Desert, no forests, no snow. I work from home. Do not commute. Do not take trains. I have not been back to Vermont since I left. And I never will. Because I know that if I go back, if I step foot in those woods again, whatever is out there will be waiting for me. And next time, I will not be lucky enough to escape. I am telling you this story because I need you to understand something. If you are ever offered a ride by a stranger, if you are ever led into the woods by someone you do not know, if you ever hear a voice calling to you from the darkness, do not follow. Do not trust. Do not believe that you are safe. Because there are things in this world that are older than us, smarter than us, and far more dangerous than we can imagine. And they are very good at pretending to be human. Paula Weldon went for a hike on December 1st, 1946. She was 18 years old, a college student, wearing a red coat that should have made her easy to find. Over 1,000 people searched for her. They used bloodhounds, aircraft, trained search and rescue teams. They combed every inch of those woods. And they found nothing. Because whatever took her did not want her to be found. I think about her sometimes. I think about the moment she realized she was in danger. The moment she understood that the person she trusted was not who they claimed to be. I think about how scared she must have been, how alone. And I think about the fact that she is still out there, somewhere in those woods. Or maybe she is not out there at all. Maybe she is part of the woods now. Maybe whatever took her absorbed her, consumed her, made her into something else. I do not sleep well anymore. I have nightmares about that night, about the forest, about the things I saw. In my dreams, I am back in those woods, and Daniel is standing in front of me, smiling. He says, "I told you I wanted to show you something." And then he changes, and I wake up screaming. There are places in this world that are not meant for humans. Places where the rules of nature do not apply, where things older and stranger than we can comprehend still hold power. The Bennington Triangle is one of those places. And if you ever find yourself near Glastonbury Mountain, near those dark woods where the trees grow too close together, and the air feels too still, do not stop. Do not get out of your car. Do not follow the voices. Just keep driving. Because once you step into those woods, once you cross that invisible line between our world and theirs, you may never come back. I survived that night, but part of me is still there, in those woods, running through the snow, trying to escape something I will never understand. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is howling and the darkness is pressing in, I can still hear it. That woman crying, Daniel laughing. And I wonder if they are still there, waiting on that dark road, looking for the next person to offer a ride, the next person to follow them into the trees, the next person who will never be seen again. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. And if you ever find yourself alone on a winter night, stranded at a train station with no way home, do not accept help from a stranger, because that stranger might not be a stranger at all. They might be something far worse, something that has been waiting for you, something that knows your name, something that will smile and offer you a ride and lead you into the darkness and make sure you never leave. I got away. I do not know how, and I do not know why, but I did, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never have to go back. I need to make something clear before I start this story. I am not telling you this because I want sympathy, or because I am looking for someone to tell me it was not my fault. I am telling you this because there are warning signs that everyone should know about. Warning signs that my family ignored, and those warning signs almost cost me everything. If even one person reads this and recognizes those signs in their own life, then maybe something good can come from what happened to me during the winter of 2018. My name is Rachel, and when I was 13 years old, my family let a predator live in our backyard. They did it to protect him from the cold. They did it because they felt sorry for him, and they did it because they believed his lies about why he had been in prison. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, in a house on the edge of town where the suburbs met the farmland. It was a nice area, quiet, the kind of place where kids could ride their bikes until dark and parents did not worry. My family was close, maybe too close. We had big dinners every Sunday with aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, the whole extended family. My mother came from a huge family, 7 siblings, and they all lived within an hour of each other. My father was an only child, so he loved being part of that big, loud, chaotic family dynamic. I had one younger brother, Marcus, who was 11 at the time. We fought like all siblings do, but we were close. He was into video games and comic books, and I was more into reading and writing. We were different, but we looked out for each other. My parents both worked full-time. My mother was a nurse at the local hospital, and my father worked construction. Money was tight sometimes, but we always had what we needed. The trouble started in December of 2018, right before Christmas. One of my mother's brothers, my Uncle Ron, was being released from prison. He had been locked up for 6 years, and none of us kids really knew why. When I asked my parents about it, they would just say that Uncle Ron had made some mistakes, that he had gotten mixed up with the wrong people, that he was paying for those mistakes now. Looking back, I realized they were protecting us from the truth. Or maybe they were protecting themselves from having to admit what kind of person he really was. Uncle Ron was the youngest of my mother's siblings, and from what I heard from other family members, he had always been the problem child. Drugs, theft, bad decisions, a pattern of behavior that had been going on since he was a teenager. The family had tried to help him over and over again, but nothing ever stuck. He would get clean for a few months, find a job, seem like he was turning things around, and then he would relapse or get arrested or disappear for weeks at a time. It was a cycle that had been repeating for 20 years. When my mother found out Ron was being released, she was torn. On one hand, he was her brother, and she felt obligated to help him. On the other hand, she had 2 kids to think about, and she knew Ron's history. My father was less conflicted. He did not trust Ron, had never trusted him, and he made it clear that he did not think we should get involved. But my mother's family put pressure on her. They said that if someone did not help Ron, he would end up back in prison or dead. They said it was the middle of winter, that temperatures were dropping below 0 at night, that it would be inhumane to let him fend for himself with nowhere to go. So my parents made a compromise. Ron could stay on our property, but not in the house. We had a large shed in the backyard, maybe 20 by 15 feet, that my father used for storage and as a workshop. It had electricity, a space heater, and enough room for a cot and some basic furniture. My father spent a weekend clearing it out, moving his tools to the garage, setting it up so Ron would have a warm, dry place to sleep. It was not luxurious, but it was better than the streets. Ron moved in 2 days before Christmas. I remember meeting him for the first time. He was tall, maybe 6'3", thin in a way that made him look unhealthy, with greasy hair and a patchy beard. He smiled a lot, too much, like he was trying to convince everyone that he was friendly and harmless. He thanked my parents over and over again, said he was going to turn his life around, get a job, save money, be out of their hair in a few months. My mother hugged him and cried, said she was just glad he was safe. My father shook his hand but did not say much. The first few weeks were uneventful. Ron kept to himself, mostly stayed in the shed, only came into the house to use the bathroom or grab food. My mother would bring him leftovers from dinner, and he would eat them out in the shed alone. He started going for runs in the mornings, said he was getting back in shape, trying to be healthy. He applied for jobs, or at least that is what he told us. My parents seemed cautiously optimistic. Maybe he really was changing. Then things started to shift. Ron started spending more time in the house. He would come in during the day when my parents were at work and Marcus and I were home from school. At first, it was just to watch TV or use the computer to look for jobs. He would sit in the living room with us, make small talk, ask about school. He seemed interested in our lives, asked questions about our friends, our hobbies, what we wanted to do when we grew up. I thought he was just trying to be a good uncle, trying to connect with us. But then I started to notice the way he looked at me. It was subtle at first, just a lingering glance that lasted a second too long, or the way he would position himself in the room so he could watch me without it being obvious. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But the feeling would not go away. Around mid-January, Ron bought Marcus a gaming console. It was an Xbox, brand new, probably $300 or $400. He said he had gotten his first paycheck from a job he had just started, and he wanted to do something nice for Marcus. My parents were surprised, but did not question it. They were happy that Ron was working, happy that he was being generous. Marcus was thrilled. He spent every free minute playing that Xbox, completely absorbed in his games. And that is when Ron started isolating me. He would suggest activities, things he and I could do together while Marcus played video games. He would say things like, "Let us go for a walk," or "Let us watch a movie in the living room," or "Let us play a board game." My parents were usually at work during these times, so it was just the 3 of us at home. Marcus would be glued to his Xbox, and Ron would have me all to himself. At first, the activities were innocent. We would watch TV, or he would help me with my homework, or we would talk about books I was reading. He was funny, charming even, and I started to let my guard down. I started to think maybe I had been wrong about the way he looked at me. Maybe he was just awkward because he had been in prison for so long, and did not know how to act around people. Then he suggested we play wrestle. He said it was something he used to do with his younger siblings when they were kids, that was fun, harmless. I was uncomfortable with the idea, but I did not know how to say no without seeming rude or hurting his feelings. So, I agreed. We would wrestle in the living room, and at first, it was kind of fun. He would let me win sometimes, pretend I was stronger than him, laugh and joke around. But then the physical contact started to feel different. His hands would linger on my arms, my shoulders, my waist. He would hold on a little too long, a little too tight, and the way he looked at me during those moments made my skin crawl. I started making excuses to avoid being alone with him. I would say I had homework, or that I was meeting a friend, or that I did not feel well. But he was persistent. He would show up in my room, knock on the door, ask if I wanted to hang out. He would text me when I was at school, ask what I was doing later, if I wanted to watch a movie when I got home. I felt trapped, like I could not escape him, like he was everywhere. One afternoon in late January, I was in the living room doing homework. Marcus was upstairs playing his Xbox, and my parents were both at work. Ron came into the house and sat down next to me on the couch. He started asking me questions about my day, my classes, my friends. Then he asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said no, and he smiled, said that was good, that boys my age were immature and did not know how to treat girls right. He said I was special, that I was mature for my age, that I was different from other 13-year-old girls. I felt my heart start to race. Every instinct in my body was telling me that something was very wrong, but I did not know what to do. I was frozen, unable to move or speak. He put his hand on my knee, and I flinched. He noticed, pulled his hand back, and laughed it off, said he was sorry, that he did not mean to make me uncomfortable. But the damage was done. I knew in that moment that he was not safe, that whatever he wanted from me, it was not innocent. I went to my room and locked the door. I texted my best friend, told her what had happened, asked her what I should do. She told me to tell my parents that what Ron did was not okay, that I needed to get him away from me. But I was scared. I was scared that no one would believe me, that they would think I was overreacting, that they would be mad at me for accusing my uncle of something so terrible. So, I did not say anything. I just avoided him as much as I could. But avoiding him was not enough. The next day, when I got home from school, he was waiting for me in the living room. He said he wanted to apologize for making me uncomfortable, that he had not meant anything by it, that he just wanted to be close to me because I reminded him of someone he cared about. He said he had a hard time in prison, that he was lonely, that he just wanted to feel connected to someone again. He was crying and I felt guilty. I felt like maybe I had misunderstood, like maybe he was just awkward and did not know how to express affection in a normal way. So I said it was okay, that I understood that we could still be friends. And he hugged me, but the hug lasted too long, and his hands were on my back, moving in a way that felt wrong. I pulled away, made an excuse about needing to do homework, and went upstairs. But I could feel him watching me as I left. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the way he touched me, the way he looked at me, the things he said. I knew I needed to tell my parents, but I was terrified. What if they did not believe me? What if they thought I was lying? What if they kicked me out instead of him? I had heard stories about families choosing to protect the abuser instead of the victim, and I was scared that would happen to me. The next afternoon, my father came home from work early. He had forgotten a tool he needed for a job, and came back to grab it from the garage. When he walked into the house, Ron and I were in the living room. We were play wrestling, something Ron had insisted on even though I had said no multiple times. But he had guilt-tripped me, said I was being mean, that I was treating him like he was a bad person, that all he wanted was to have fun with his niece. So, I gave in, just to make him stop pressuring me. My father walked in and saw us. Ron was on top of me, pinning me down, and I was trying to push him off. My father's face went white, then red. He started yelling, told Ron to get off me, to to get out of the house, to never touch me again. I had never seen my father so angry. He sent me to my room, and I could hear him and Ron shouting at each other downstairs. I do not know exactly what was said, but I heard the front door slam, and then my father came upstairs and asked me if I was okay. I started crying, told him everything that had happened, everything I had been too scared to say before. My father held me while I cried, told me it was not my fault, that he should have known, that he should have protected me. He called my mother, told her to come home immediately. When she got there, they sat me down and asked me to tell them everything again. I told them about the looks, the touches, the things Ron said, the way he made me feel. My mother cried. She said she was sorry, that she should have listened to the warnings, that she should have known better. They told me that Ron had been in prison for having a relationship with an underage girl. The family had believed his story, that it was a misunderstanding, that he thought she was 18, that it was all a mistake. But my father said he never believed it, that he had always suspected Ron was lying. And now, seeing the way Ron acted with me, he knew for sure. Ron was gone by the next morning. My father told him he had to leave, that he was not welcome on our property ever again. Ron tried to argue, said my father was overreacting, that he had not done anything wrong. But my father did not budge. He told Ron that if he ever came near me or Marcus again, he would call the police. Ron left, and we never saw him again. I found out later from my mother that Ron had a history of this kind of behavior. He had been accused of inappropriate conduct with minors multiple times, but the family had always made excuses for him, said the girls were lying, said Ron was just misunderstood. My mother was ashamed that she had let him into our home, that she had put me in danger. She apologized over and over again, said she would never forgive herself. It has been 7 years since all of this happened. I am 20 years old now, in college, studying psychology because I want to understand how people like Ron operate, how they manipulate families into protecting them, how they groom their victims into silence. I spent a lot of time in therapy, working through the trauma of what happened, learning to recognize that none of it was my fault. But the scars are still there. I do not trust easily. I am hyper aware of how people look at me, how they touch me, what they say to me. I avoid being alone with men I do not know well, even men who seem perfectly safe. I check my locks 3 times before bed. I look over my shoulder when I walk alone. And every winter, when the temperature drops and the snow starts to fall, I think about that shed in our backyard, and I think about how close I came to something much worse. I am sharing this story because I want people to understand how grooming works, how predators gain access to their victims, how they isolate them, how they build trust while simultaneously breaking down boundaries. Ron bought Marcus that Xbox so he would be distracted, so I would be alone. He spent weeks building a relationship with me, making me feel special, making me feel guilty for not trusting him. And he did all of this while my parents were just a phone call away, while I was in my own home, where I was supposed to be safe. The research I have done since then has been eye-opening. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys experience sexual abuse before the age of 18. 90% of that abuse is committed by someone the child knows and trusts. Family members, coaches, teachers, neighbors, people who have been given access to children because they seem safe, because they seem helpful, because the family believes they would never hurt anyone. There are warning signs that everyone should know. Excessive or inappropriate attention to a child. Gifts that seem out of proportion to the relationship. Attempts to isolate the child from friends or family. Boundary violations, like inappropriate touching, even if it seems innocent at first. Secret keeping. Making the child feel like they cannot talk to their parents about what is happening. These are all tactics that predators use, and they are all things that Ron did to me. I learned about a case in Michigan that has haunted me ever since I read about it. In the 1970s, 4 children were abducted and murdered over the course of 13 months in Oakland County, just outside Detroit. The case became known as the Oakland County Child Killer, or the Snow Killings, because the bodies were found in the snow, carefully placed near public roads. The children had been held captive for days, fed, bathed, cared for in a twisted way before being killed. The case was never officially solved, but investigators believe the killer was someone the children knew and trusted. Someone who had access to them. Someone who groomed them into compliance before taking their lives. That case terrified me because it showed how predators can hide in plain sight, how they can gain the trust of entire communities while committing unspeakable acts. One of the prime suspects was a man named Christopher Bush, a convicted child predator who lived in the area at the time. He had a history of abusing children, but his wealthy family protected him, paid for lawyers, made excuses for his behavior. He died before he could be charged, and the families of those 4 children never got justice. Reading about that case made me realize how lucky I was. My father came home early that day. He saw what was happening. He believed me. He protected me. Not every child is that lucky. Not every family chooses the victim over the abuser. And that is why I'm telling this story. If you are a parent, please pay attention to the adults in your child's life. Watch for the warning signs. Do not make excuses for inappropriate behavior. Do not assume that someone is safe just because they are family, or because they seem nice, or because they have always been kind to your child. Predators are manipulative. They are good at hiding who they really are, and they will exploit any weakness, any opening, any opportunity to get to their victims. If you are a child or a teenager reading this, and someone is making you feel uncomfortable, please tell someone. Tell your parents, tell a teacher, tell a friend's parent, tell anyone who will listen. It is not your fault. You are not being dramatic. You are not overreacting. Your instincts are telling you something is wrong because something is wrong, and you deserve to be protected. I think about that winter a lot. I think about how cold it was, how the snow piled up in our backyard, how that shed looked like such an innocent structure, just a place for my father to store his tools. But it became something else. It became a symbol of how easily danger can be invited into our lives, how quickly safety can be compromised, how important it is to trust our instincts even when everyone else is telling us we are wrong. Ron is out there somewhere. I do not know where he is or what he is doing. Part of me hopes he got help, that he changed, that he is not hurting anyone else. But another part of me knows better. People like Ron do not change. They just get better at hiding. And that is the scariest part of all. My name is Paul Brennan, and I am a 34-year-old software engineer who lives alone in a rental house in Fairbanks, Vermont. I have generalized anxiety disorder, which I have managed reasonably well for the past decade with medication and therapy. But anxiety is not what drove me to do what I did. Fear is not the same as paranoia. And what happened in my house during the blizzard of January 2026 was not a hallucination. It started 3 weeks ago when a group of teenagers egged my front window. I had put up a simple sign on my porch that said "No soliciting, please." I work from home. I have sensory issues with doorbells, and I prefer not to be disturbed. The sign was polite. It was reasonable. But apparently, it offended someone. The first incident happened on a Saturday afternoon. I heard laughter outside, then a wet smacking sound against glass. When I looked out my window, I saw 3 boys, maybe 16 or 17 years old, running down my driveway. One of them wore a red jacket with a wolf logo on the back. My living room window was streaked with raw egg, already freezing in the January cold. I cleaned it off. I told myself it was just kids being stupid. I tried to let it go, but they came back. 2 days later, my mailbox was knocked over. The following night, someone threw a rock through my kitchen window. I called the police. The officer who responded, a bored-looking man named Deputy Ellis, took notes, and said they would keep an eye out. He did not sound convinced it would happen again. It happened again. They spray-painted the word weirdo across my garage door. They scattered trash across my lawn. They rang my doorbell at 2 a.m. and ran away, leaving me trembling and unable to sleep for the rest of the night. I started documenting everything. I installed a security camera above my front door. I kept a log of every incident with dates and times. I tried to be rational, methodical, calm. But then the weather report came. A historic blizzard was heading toward Vermont. Forecasters predicted up to 3 feet of snow, high winds, power outages. The entire region would be locked down for at least 5 days. I stocked up on food, batteries, candles. I checked my generator. I was prepared. What I did not prepare for was the boy in the red jacket standing in my backyard at 9 p.m., the night before the storm hit. I saw him through my kitchen window. He was just standing there, 20 feet from my back door, staring at the house. Not moving, not hiding, just staring. I turned on the porch light. He did not react. I knocked on the window. He smiled. That smile. It was not the smile of a stupid teenager playing a prank. It was something else. Something colder. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher said they would send someone. 15 minutes later, Deputy Ellis pulled into my driveway. By then, the boy was gone. Ellis walked around my yard with a flashlight, found nothing, and told me the kid probably ran off when he saw the lights. He said, "Look, I understand you are anxious about this stuff, but you cannot keep calling us every time you see someone outside. Kids hang out in neighborhoods. It is not illegal." I said, "He was in my backyard, staring at my house." Ellis looked at me the way people look at someone they think is overreacting. He said, "The storm is coming. Everyone is on edge. Just lock your doors and try to relax." Then he left. The blizzard started 6 hours later. By morning, the snow was already 2 feet deep. The wind howled so loudly it sounded like something alive. The power went out around noon. My generator kicked in, but I knew it would not last forever. I was alone, completely isolated. No one could reach me, and I could not reach anyone. That is when I started noticing the footprints. They appeared in the snow around my house. Fresh prints, circling the perimeter. Small boot treads, the kind a teenage boy might wear. They came right up to my windows, then moved to the next one, methodical, deliberate. I watched from inside, my breath fogging the glass, as the prints multiplied. Whoever was making them was walking around my house over and over, inspecting it, learning it. I called 911 again. The dispatcher said all emergency services were suspended due to the storm. No one could come. I was on my own. I locked every door, every window. I pushed furniture against the entrances. I turned off all the lights except one in the hallway, so I could see movement. I sat in my living room with a baseball bat across my lap and waited. The knocking started at midnight. Not at the front door. At the basement window. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, rhythmic, patient. I went downstairs, bat in hand, and peered through the small frosted window. I could not see anyone. But the knocking continued. Tap, tap, tap. Then I heard it at the back door. Then the side door. Then upstairs at my bedroom window. They were surrounding me. I do not know how many there were. 3, maybe 4. Moving around the house in coordinated silence, testing every entry point, tapping on glass, rattling doorknobs. I screamed at them to leave. I threatened to call the police. I told them I had a gun. The tapping stopped. For 10 minutes, there was only wind and snow. Then I heard the sound of breaking glass from the basement. Someone had smashed the small window near the furnace. It was too small for an adult to fit through, but a skinny teenager could manage it. I ran downstairs and saw him. The boy in the red jacket halfway through the window, his legs still outside, snow blowing in around him. He looked at me and grinned. I swung the bat. I did not think. I did not hesitate. I swung as hard as I could. The bat connected with his shoulder, then his head. He made a choking sound and fell backward out of the window into the snow. I stood there, shaking, staring at the broken glass. I waited for him to get up. I waited for the others to come crashing in. Nothing happened. I boarded up the window with plywood and nails. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the hammer. I dragged a filing cabinet in front of the board for extra security. Then I went back upstairs and waited. The knocking did not return that night, or the next night, or the night after that. The storm raged for 4 days. I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. I kept the bat with me at all times. On the 5th day, the snow stopped. The roads began to clear. I saw a snowplow pass by my street. I should have felt relief. I should have felt safe. But I kept thinking about the boy. About the sound his head made when the bat hit it. About how he fell backward into the snow and did not get up. I went outside for the first time since the storm started. The snow was 4 feet deep in places, sculpted into massive drifts by the wind. I walked around to the side of my house where the basement window was. There were no footprints. The snow was undisturbed, smooth, perfect. I dug down to the window. The plywood was still in place from the inside, but the glass was not broken. It was intact. I stood there in the freezing cold, staring at the window, trying to understand. Then I saw it. Perched on my fence post, 15 feet away. A large black crow. It was perfectly still, watching me with eyes that did not blink. It had been there the whole time, I realized. I had seen it before the storm, sitting on my mailbox, on my roof, always at a distance, always watching. It cocked its head, and for a moment, I swear it looked like it was smiling. I went back inside and called the police. I told them I needed to report an assault. Deputy Ellis arrived 20 minutes later. I took him to the basement. I showed him the filing cabinet I had dragged in front of the window. I moved it aside and pulled down the plywood. The window was fine, unbroken. Ellis looked at me with something between pity and concern. He said, "Mr. Brennan, have you been taking your medication?" I said, I hit him. I heard the glass break. I saw him coming through. Ellis crouched down and examined the window frame. No cracks, no damage, no sign of forced entry. He said, "The stress of the storm can do things to people. Isolation, anxiety. It is not uncommon to experience heightened paranoia." I said, "I am not paranoid." They were here. The boy in the red jacket. Ellis stood up and put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "We have been getting calls all week from people seeing things that were not there. Cabin fever, they call it. I think you should talk to your doctor. Maybe stay with a friend for a few days." He left. He thought I was crazy. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know the wet crack of the bat hitting bone. So I went looking. I spent the next week searching. I dug through the snow around my house. I walked the neighborhood, looking for any sign of the boy, any indication that he had been real. I found nothing. No blood. No body. No evidence. But the crow was always there. On the fence, on the mailbox, on the telephone wire. Watching. Waiting. Yesterday, I saw the boy. He was standing across the street from my house, wearing the same red jacket, hands in his pockets, staring at me through my living room window. I ran outside, but he was gone. When I came back in, there was a note taped to my front door. 5 words, written in pencil. "You should have stayed inside." I am writing this now because I do not know what else to do. The police will not believe me. My therapist thinks I am having a breakdown. My medication is not helping. But I know the truth. I did not imagine the boy. I did not imagine the knocking, the footprints, the breaking glass. It was real. And if it was real, then what I did was real too. I hurt him. Maybe worse. And now he is coming back. The crow is on my windowsill right now. It has not moved in 3 hours. Its eyes are black, empty, mechanical. It does not blink. It does not breathe. It just watches. The snow is falling again. They are calling for another storm. 5 more days of isolation. I have boarded up every window. I have pushed furniture against every door. I have checked the lock 17 times in the past hour. But I can hear it now. That sound. Tap, 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 tap. At the basement window. At the back door. At the bedroom window upstairs. They are here again. And this time, I do not think they are going to leave. I majored in chemistry at university. I think astrology is nonsense, and I have spent my entire adult life explaining to people that correlation does not equal causation. So, when I tell you that something impossible followed me through the winter of 2021, I need you to know that I am telling you this despite every rational bone in my body screaming that it could not have happened. But it did, and I still do not know what it was. My name is Sarah, and at the time, I was a 23-year-old graduate student living alone in a small apartment near campus in Burlington, Vermont. The place was nothing special, just a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of an old converted house about 3 blocks from the university. My landlord was an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who lived on the ground floor, and the 3rd floor was occupied by a young couple I rarely saw. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, exactly the kind of place where you would expect nothing bad to ever happen. I had moved in that September, and everything was fine until winter arrived. I remember the first snowfall came early that year, mid-November, and it was heavy. The entire town was blanketed in white overnight, that thick, muffling kind of snow that makes everything look like a postcard. I loved it at first. I would sit by my window in the evenings with a cup of tea, watching the snow fall, and feeling grateful to be warm and safe inside. That window faced the street, and I had a clear view of the sidewalk, the streetlights, the bare trees heavy with snow. It started so innocuously that I almost did not notice it. One night, maybe a week after that first snowfall, I was sitting by the window around 11 at night. I had just finished studying for an exam, and I was unwinding before bed, watching the snow come down in the lamplight. That is when I saw it. A figure standing on the sidewalk directly across from my building. Just standing there, completely still, facing my window. At first I thought it was someone waiting for a ride, or maybe a neighbor out for a late-night walk. But something about the way the figure stood bothered me. It was too still, too deliberate. I watched for maybe 5 minutes, and during that entire time, the figure did not move, not even to shift weight or look around. Just stood there, staring up at my window. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I closed the curtains and went to bed. The next night, it was there again. Same spot, same time, same unnatural stillness. This time, I tried to get a better look. I turned off the lights in my apartment so I could see outside without being seen as clearly, and I pressed my face close to the glass. But even with the streetlight, I could not make out any details. The figure was just a dark shape, humanoid, but featureless, like a shadow standing in the snow. I watched for 20 minutes that night, and it never moved. Eventually I gave up and went to bed, but I did not sleep well. This continued for a week. Every single night around 11 the figure would be there, always in the same spot, always facing my window. I started documenting it, taking photos on my phone, but every picture came out too dark or too blurry to show anything useful. I told my roommate from undergrad about it over the phone, and she laughed it off. said it was probably just someone from the neighborhood who liked to smoke outside at night. But that did not explain why they never moved, why they never seemed to breathe or shiver despite the freezing temperatures. I started researching. I know that sounds stupid, but I needed answers. I found stories online, Reddit threads and forum posts about similar experiences. People who had seen figures watching them from a distance, always at night, always in winter. One post in particular stuck with me. A woman in Michigan had described seeing a man standing outside her house every night for 2 weeks in January, always in the same spot, never moving. She said she finally called the police, and when they investigated, they found footprints in the snow leading to where the man had been standing, but no footprints leading away. Just a circle of disturbed snow, as if he had vanished into thin air. I did not want to call the police. I felt ridiculous, like I was overreacting. What would I even tell them?
There is someone standing on a public sidewalk.
That is not a crime. So, I tried to ignore it. I stopped looking out the window at night, kept my curtains closed, focused on my work. But ignoring it did not make it go away. One night in early December, I broke my own rule. I had been working late on a research paper, and I was exhausted. I walked into my living room to grab some water, and without thinking, I glanced out the window. And there it was, but closer. It was no longer on the sidewalk. It was standing in the yard directly below my window, maybe 20 feet away, and it was looking up at me. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The figure was still just a dark shape, but now I could see that it was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with an unnaturally thin frame. It did not move, did not react to me looking at it. It just stood there. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking, and I called Mrs. Chen. I told her someone was in the yard, that I needed her to check if she could see them from her window. She agreed, and a few minutes later, she called me back. She said she looked outside, walked all the way around the building with a flashlight, and there was no one there. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. The next morning, I went outside to look for footprints, and I found them. Deep, clear prints in the snow, leading from the sidewalk to the spot directly below my window. But that is where they stopped. There were no footprints leading away, just a disturbed patch of snow where something had stood, and then nothing. I stood there in the freezing cold, staring at those prints, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe the snow had covered the other prints. Maybe I just could not see them. But I knew that was not true. The snow had stopped falling hours before I saw the figure. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I could not focus on my studies, could not sleep without checking the window every few minutes. I told my advisor I was dealing with a family emergency and took a week off from classes. I spent that week researching everything I could find about unexplained phenomena, shadow figures, apparitions. I found references to something called a watcher, a type of entity that appears in folklore across multiple cultures. The descriptions varied, but the core was always the same. A tall, dark figure that watches people from a distance, never speaking, never moving, unless you look away. Some stories said it was a harbinger of death, that seeing it meant someone close to you was going to die. Others said it was a kind of psychic parasite, feeding on fear and attention. I did not believe any of it. I could not, but I also could not explain what I was seeing. Things escalated around mid-December. I had a small gathering at my apartment to celebrate the end of finals. Just 4 friends, nothing major. We were drinking hot chocolate, laughing, trying to forget about the stress of the semester. At one point, someone knocked on the door. I assumed it was one of my friends who had stepped out for a smoke, so I walked over and opened it without checking the peephole. No one was there. I stepped into the hallway, looked both ways, nothing. My friends thought it was funny, joked that I had a secret admirer playing pranks, but I knew better. Later that night, after everyone had left, I was cleaning up when I heard scratching at the door. Not knocking, scratching. Like nails on wood. I stood there, frozen, listening. The scratching continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I looked through the peephole, and there was nothing. I opened the door, looked into the hallway, and again, nothing. But when I closed the door and locked it, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps going up to the 3rd floor. I called the couple who lived above me, asked if they had just come home. They said they had been in their apartment all evening, had not left once. The next day, I found muddy footprints in the hallway outside my door. They were larger than any human foot I had ever seen, elongated, almost like they had been stretched. I took photos, showed them to Mrs. Chen, but she just looked at me with concern and asked if I was feeling okay. The footprints disappeared by the next morning as if they had never been there. I decided I needed to leave. I packed a bag and drove to my parents' house in New Hampshire, about 2 hours away. I told them I just wanted to spend the holidays at home, that I was feeling homesick. They were happy to have me. I spent Christmas and New Year with them, trying to forget about what had been happening. And for a while, it worked. I felt normal again, rational. I convinced myself that I had been stressed, that I had imagined most of it, that the footprints were just a coincidence. But when I returned to my apartment in early January, it was waiting for me. Not outside, not in the hallway, inside. I walked into my living room, and there it was, standing in the corner by the window. The same tall, dark figure, but now I could see it clearly. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless surface where a head should have been. Its arms were too long, hanging past its knees, and it was absolutely motionless. I ran. I did not grab my things, did not lock the door, just ran out of the apartment and down the stairs. I got in my car and drove straight back to my parents' house. I called my landlord the next day and told her I was breaking my lease, that I would pay whatever penalties I needed to, but I was not going back. She was confused, said she would need to inspect the apartment, and I told her to do whatever she wanted. I never went back. A few weeks later, Mrs. Chen called me. She said she had gone into my apartment to clean it out, and she found something strange. My living room window was wide open, and there was snow all over the floor, like something had come in from outside. But we were on the 2nd floor. There was no fire escape, no balcony, no way for anything to get in through that window without climbing the outside of the building. She asked me if I knew anything about it, and I told her I did not. I did not tell her about the figure, about the footprints, about any of it. What would be the point? I found out later, through a mutual friend, that the couple who lived above me moved out a month after I did. They told people they kept hearing scratching sounds at night, kept seeing shadows moving in their peripheral vision. The apartment building is empty now, has been for over 3 years. Mrs. Chen tried to rent it out, but no one stays longer than a few weeks. They all report the same things. A figure standing outside at night, footprints with no source, scratching at the doors. I have tried to move on with my life. I finished my degree, got a job in a different city, somewhere warm where it never snows. But I still think about it. I still wonder what it was, what it wanted. And every winter when the first snow falls, I find myself checking the windows, looking for that tall, dark shape, standing in the cold, watching, waiting. I know it sounds insane. I know I have no proof, no evidence that would convince anyone. But I also know what I saw. I know that something was there. Something that should not exist. Something that broke every rule of reality I had ever believed in. If you ever see a figure standing outside your window at night, still and silent in the falling snow, do not ignore it. Do not convince yourself it is nothing. Because once it knows you have seen it, it will not stop watching. And eventually, it will come inside. I was lucky. I got up before that happened. Not everyone does. I read a story once, years after everything happened, about a group of hikers in Russia who died under mysterious circumstances back in 1959. They were found in the snow, scattered across a mountain slope, some of them with horrific injuries that could not be explained by any natural cause. One of the women was missing her eyes and tongue. The official report said they died from a compelling natural force, but no one ever figured out what that force was. Some people think it was an avalanche, or hypothermia, or a government cover-up. But when I read about it, all I could think about was that figure, that tall, dark shape standing in the cold. I wondered if they saw it too, if that was what made them run from their tent in the middle of the night, cutting through the fabric with knives to get away faster. I wondered if it followed them through the snow, if it watched them freeze and die one by one. I do not know if there is a connection. I do not know if what I saw is the same thing others have seen. But I do know that there are things in this world that we do not understand, things that exist outside the boundaries of science and reason. And I know that winter is when they come out. When the snow falls and the world goes quiet, that is when they watch us. That is when they wait. I am telling you this because I need someone to know. I need someone to believe me, even if you think I am crazy. Because if it happens to you, if you see that figure standing outside your window, you need to know that you are not imagining it. You need to know that it is real. And you need to get out as fast as you can, before it decides that watching is not enough anymore. Trust your instincts. Trust that feeling in your gut that tells you something is wrong. Because sometimes the things we cannot explain are the most dangerous things of all. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. What happened to me when I was 11 years old should not have happened to any child. But it did happen, and I survived it, and I am telling you about it now, because there are warning signs that everyone should recognize. Warning signs about the adults who are supposed to protect you, and warning signs about the things that walk in the winter darkness. Both are real. Both are dangerous. And sometimes, the monsters inside your home are what drive you into the arms of the monsters outside. My name is Catherine, but when I was 11, everyone called me Marion. I lived in a large estate in upstate New York called Ernst Moor, a sprawling property on the edge of a dense forest, with my grandfather Thomas Ernst and several other family members. The house had been in my family for generations, built in the 1800s, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and a widow's walk on the roof where, in the old days, women would watch for their husbands' ships to return from sea. We were nowhere near the ocean, but the previous owner had been a ship captain, and he had insisted on the architectural feature. I loved my grandfather more than anyone in the world. He was kind, patient, intelligent, everything a grandfather should be. He taught me about birds, about history, about the world beyond our small corner of New York. He gave me gifts, books, a water whistle that made sounds like a canary. He made me feel seen, valued, important. He was the only person in that house who treated me like I mattered. The other person who lived with us was my uncle Hector, my grandfather's son. Hector was cruel. There is no other word for it. He resented me, resented the attention my grandfather gave me, resented my existence. He would find reasons to criticize me, to punish me, to make my life miserable. My grandfather tried to protect me, but he was old, and he went to bed early, and after he retired for the night, I was alone with Hector. This story takes place in December of 2015, during one of the coldest winters New York had seen in decades. Temperatures dropped below zero most nights, and the snow piled up in drifts that reached the first-floor windows. The estate was isolated, surrounded by forest, miles from the nearest town. We were completely cut off from the outside world. I spent most of my time outside during the day, watching birds, exploring the grounds, anything to avoid being in the house with Hector. My grandfather had warned me about staying out after dark. He told me there were things in the woods, things he called the night wanderers. He said they came out when the sun went down, and if you were too close to the forest at night, you would die in a way that nobody deserved. I did not understand what he meant at the time. I thought maybe he was talking about wolves or bears. I did not know that there were things far worse than wild predators in those woods. One evening in mid-December, I was outside later than I should have been. I had lost track of time, watching the sunset, listening to the birds settle in for the night. When I finally went inside, Hector was waiting for me. He grabbed me by the collar of my dress, yanked me backwards, made me fall in the mud. He told me I had ruined my dress, that I had wasted his time because he had been sent to find me for supper. He was angry, angrier than usual, and I could tell he was planning something. At dinner, my grandfather defended me. He told Hector to leave me alone, that I was just a child, that I had done nothing wrong. Hector said nothing, but his scowl deepened. I knew I would pay for that later. After supper, my grandfather went to bed. I tried to stay in my room, tried to avoid Hector, but he found me. He always found me. He followed me through the house, criticizing everything I did, everything I said. I tried to get away from him, tried to lose him in the maze of rooms and hallways, but he was persistent. Finally, I went up to the Widow's Walk. It was my favorite place in the house, a quiet outdoor platform on the roof where I could look at the stars, where I could be alone. Hector hated climbing stairs, and I thought I would be safe there. I was wrong. He followed me up. He came through the door onto the Widow's Walk, huffing and puffing from the effort of the climb, and he looked at me with a hatred I had never seen before. He said I needed to learn respect for my elders. He said I needed to understand that there were consequences for making him look bad in front of my grandfather. And then he took my water whistle from my hand, the gift my grandfather had given me, and he stepped back through the door. He locked it behind him. He locked me outside, on the roof, in the middle of winter, in temperatures that were well below zero. I banged on the door. I screamed. I begged him to let me back in. But he just laughed. He said he would come back for me in the morning, and if I had frozen to death, he would tell everyone it was an accident, that I must have locked myself out. If I survived, he would say he was teaching me a lesson about respecting my elders. I was terrified. It was already dark, and the temperature was dropping fast. I could see my breath in the air, white clouds that dissipated into the blackness. I looked around for a way to get warm, for any source of heat. The chimney. The fireplace inside the house was always lit at night, and the chimney ran up through the roof. I climbed over the railing of the Widow's Walk, careful not to slip on the ice, and I positioned myself against the brick of the chimney. It was warm, warmer than the air around me, and I wrapped my scarf around my hands and feet, tucking them under my body to preserve heat. I knew I would not sleep well, but I thought I could survive until morning. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, it was much darker. The stars were out, countless and bright, and the moon was a thin sliver barely visible in the sky. And that is when I saw them. The night wanderers. The things my grandfather had warned me about. At first I thought I was hallucinating. I was cold, exhausted, scared, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became that what I was seeing was real. There were figures moving at the edge of the forest, at the perimeter of the estate grounds. They were tall, impossibly tall, and thin, their limbs bent at strange angles. They moved like spiders, scuttling across the ground on all fours, their bodies close to the earth, their heads swiveling as they searched for something. I watched, frozen in terror, as one of them approached the fence that surrounded the property. It moved with unnatural speed, climbing over the wrought iron fence in seconds, and then it was inside the grounds, moving toward the house. I could see its face now, or what should have been its face. It was skeletal, emaciated, with sunken eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its mouth was too wide, filled with sharp teeth, and its skin was the color of ash. It looked like something that had starved to death and then come back to life, driven by an insatiable hunger. I pressed myself against the chimney, trying to make myself as small as possible, trying not to breathe, not to move. I remembered my grandfather's words. The night wanderers. Things that came from the woods when darkness fell. Things that would kill you in a way nobody deserved. I heard sounds. Scratching, scraping, the sound of something climbing the outside of the house. I realized with horror that the creatures were scaling the walls, using their long limbs and sharp claws to pull themselves up toward the roof. Toward me. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door was locked. I was trapped. The scratching got louder, closer. I could hear them on the roof now, moving around, searching. And then they stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. I kept my eyes closed, pressed my face against the chimney, and prayed that they would not find me. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I lost track of time. And then I heard a voice. A woman's voice crying, calling out for help. It sounded human, desperate, frightened. But I knew it was not human. My grandfather had told me stories about creatures that could mimic voices, that used the sounds of distress to lure people out of safety. I kept my eyes closed. I did not move. The crying continued for a long time. It moved around the roof, getting closer, then farther away, then closer again. And then it stopped. I opened my eyes just slightly, and I saw one of them. It was standing on the widow's walk, maybe 10 feet from where I was hiding. It was looking at me. I could feel its gaze, cold and hungry and patient. It knew I was there. It was waiting for me to move, to run, to give it a reason to chase me. I did not move. I did not breathe. I closed my eyes again and stayed as still as possible. I felt something brush against my leg, light as a feather, and I realized it was one of the creature's hands, reaching out, testing me. But I did not react. I stayed frozen, and after what felt like an eternity, the touch withdrew. The scratching sounds resumed, moving away from where I was hiding, and eventually, they faded completely. I do not know how long I stayed there. Hours, maybe. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body shutting down from the cold, my mind retreating into dreams. I dreamed that the creatures had found me, that they were dragging me into the forest, that I was being devoured alive. I dreamed that my grandfather was calling for me, but I could not answer. I dreamed that I was warm, safe, back inside the house. When I woke up, the sun was rising. The sky was pale blue and pink, and the creatures were gone. Hector arrived a few minutes later, unlocking the door, expecting to find me either frozen to death or begging for mercy. But I was alive. Barely, but alive. He looked surprised. He asked me if I had seen anything strange during the night. I asked him how he knew. He smiled, a cruel, knowing smile, and said that he had seen them too. The things that crawled around the estate at night. The night wanderers. He told me I was lucky it had been so cold. He said that otherwise, they would have smelled me. That they hunted by scent, and the freezing temperatures had masked my presence. He told me that if I ever told anyone about what had happened, no one would believe me. That I would be called a liar. That I would be punished even worse than I had been that night. And then he let me back inside. I went to my room, got into bed, and tried to process what had happened. My grandfather came to see me later that morning, concerned about why I had slept so late. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him about Hector locking me out, about the creatures I had seen, about how terrified I had been. But I was too scared. Scared of Hector, scared that my grandfather would not believe me, scared that talking about it would make it real in a way I could not handle. So, I said nothing. But I started paying attention. I started watching the estate grounds at night from my bedroom window, and I saw them. Every night, once the sun went down, the night wanderers would emerge from the forest. Sometimes there were only a few. Sometimes there were dozens. They would move across the grounds, climbing the fences, scaling the walls of the house, searching for something. For someone. I researched everything I could find about creatures like the ones I had seen. I found stories from indigenous folklore, legends about the Wendigo, a cannibalistic spirit that appeared during harsh winters, driven by insatiable hunger. The Wendigo was said to be created when a person resorted to cannibalism during times of starvation, transforming into a monster that could never be satisfied. It was tall, skeletal, with glowing eyes and sharp teeth, exactly like the things I had seen. The legend said that Wendigos hunted at night, that they could mimic human voices to lure prey, that they grew larger and hungrier with each victim they consumed. I also found stories from European folklore about creatures called revenants, corpses that rose from the grave during winter to hunt the living, and stories from Slavic mythology about the Leshy forest spirits that punished those who disrespected nature. Every culture had a version of these winter monsters. Things that came with the cold, things that fed on human flesh, things that should not exist, but did. I learned about real cases too. Cases of children who had died from hypothermia after being locked outside as punishment. Thomas Velva, an 8-year-old boy from Long Island, who froze to death in his father's garage in January of 2020. His body temperature was 76.1 degrees when he was found. He had been forced to sleep on the bare concrete floor, in sub-freezing temperatures, night after night as punishment for wetting the bed. His father and his father's girlfriend were both convicted of murder. Christian Pavan, an 11-year-old boy from Texas, who died of suspected hypothermia during a power outage in February of 2021. He froze to death in his own bed under a pile of blankets because the electricity had failed and there was no heat in his family's mobile home. Alina Pascal, a 3-year-old girl from Georgia, who froze to death in the woods in January of 2024 after her mother dragged her and her brother outside during a rainstorm. The mother had a fully charged phone but did not call for help. Alina's brother tried to warm her up by covering her with leaves, but it was not enough. She died of hypothermia. These were real children, real deaths, and they all had one thing in common. They died because the adults who were supposed to protect them failed. They died because someone made a choice to put them in danger, to leave them in the cold, to ignore their suffering. I survived that night on the Widow's Walk, but I did not escape unscathed. I developed frostbite on my fingers and toes, nerve damage that still causes me pain on cold days. I developed anxiety, nightmares, a fear of the dark that I have never been able to shake. And I developed a deep, abiding hatred for Hector that has not faded even now, 25 years later. My grandfather died 3 years after that night. He never knew what Hector had done to me. I kept it secret, kept the whole thing buried, because I was too scared to speak up. After my grandfather died, I left Ernst Moore Estate and never went back. I went to live with an aunt in California, finished high school, went to college, built a life far away from that place. But I think about that night often. I think about the creatures I saw, the night wanderers, and whether they were real or just hallucinations brought on by hypothermia and fear. I think about the stories my grandfather told me, the warnings he gave me, and whether he knew what was out there in the woods. I think about Hector, and whether he knew the creatures were real, whether he had seen them before, whether he deliberately left me out there knowing what might find me. I also think about the children who did not survive, the ones who froze to death because someone failed to protect them, the ones whose names I will never know because their stories were never reported, never investigated, never acknowledged. And I think about the monsters, not the creatures in the woods, but the ones inside our homes, the ones who hurt children and then convince everyone that it was an accident, that the child was at fault, that nothing could have been done. I looked up Hector a few years ago. He died in 2018, alone in Ernst Moore Estate, the last surviving member of the Ernst family to live there. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but according to the news reports, he was found outside, near the edge of the forest, in the middle of winter. His body was covered in scratches, deep gouges that looked like they had been made by claws. The medical examiner ruled that the scratches were caused by him falling and hitting branches, that he had been trying to get back to the house when he collapsed. But I know better. I know what killed Hector. The same things that almost killed me. The night wanderers. The creatures that hunt in the winter darkness, driven by an insatiable hunger that can never be satisfied. Whether they are wendigos or revenants or something else entirely, I do not know. But I know they are real. I know they exist. And I know they do not discriminate. They will take anyone who strays too close to the forest at night. Anyone who is left outside, vulnerable, alone. The estate was sold after Hector died. The new owners lasted less than a year. They reported strange noises at night, scratching sounds on the walls and roof, sightings of tall, skeletal figures moving across the grounds. They left in the middle of the night and never came back. The estate has been empty ever since. No one wants to live there. No one wants to face whatever is in those woods. I am telling this story because I need people to understand that there are two kinds of monsters in this world. The ones that walk on two legs and hurt children because they can, and the ones that walk on four legs and hunt in the darkness because that is their nature. Both are real. Both are dangerous. And sometimes, the first kind creates the conditions that allow the second kind to thrive. If you are a child and someone is hurting you, please tell someone. Tell a teacher, tell a friend's parent, tell anyone who will listen. Do not stay silent because you are scared. Do not protect the person who is hurting you, because staying silent can kill you. It almost killed me. And if you ever find yourself in a place like Ernst Moor Estate, in a house on the edge of a dark forest, in the middle of a harsh winter, pay attention to the warnings. If someone tells you not to go outside after dark, listen to them. If someone tells you there are things in the woods that hunt at night, believe them. Because those warnings are not superstition. They are survival. I survived the night wanderers. I survived Hector. I survived the cold. But not everyone does. And the ones who do not survive deserve to have their stories told. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve justice. So, remember Thomas Valva. Remember Christian Pavin. Remember Alina Pascal. Remember all the children who died because someone failed to protect them. And if you ever have the chance to protect a child, to intervene, to speak up, do it. Do not look away. Do not assume someone else will handle it. Because sometimes, you are the only thing standing between a child and the darkness. And whether that darkness comes from inside the house or outside in the woods, it is equally deadly. Winter is coming. The night wanderers are waiting. And the monsters inside our homes are still hurting children. Stay vigilant. Stay safe. And never, ever leave a child out in the cold. I want to make something clear before I start this story. This is not about ghosts or monsters or supernatural creatures. This is about something far more insidious and dangerous, because it is completely real and happening right now. This is about tradition, family pressure, and the refusal to acknowledge that the world has changed. It is about how that refusal almost killed me and dozens of other women in a small valley in Northern California during the winter of 2023. My name is Piper, and I am 24 years old. When this story takes place, I was 22, newly married, and living in a rural town called Clearwater in Lake County, about 100 miles from San Francisco. I grew up in San Francisco in a modern apartment with high-end HVAC systems and air purifiers, where we monitored the air quality index, a QI, every single day. I knew about pollution. I knew about PM 250 particles and how they could damage your lungs. I knew that the West Coast often had some of the worst air quality in the world, especially during the months when massive wildfires combined with vehicular emissions and industrial dust to create a toxic haze. But my new in-laws did not care about any of that. They cared about tradition. In Clearwater, the tradition was that every family slept on their sleeping porches or open-air balconies, not just in the summer to escape the heat, but year-round. They had been doing it for generations, and they weren't going to stop, just because a city girl thought she knew better. A change in perspective. I married into this family in September 2023. My husband, Ryan, seemed modern and educated. We had met in San Francisco, where he worked in software engineering. He seemed progressive and open-minded. But the moment we arrived at his family's estate in Clearwater for the wedding, I saw a different side of him. He deferred to his mother on everything, and followed family customs without question. When I tried to talk to him about my concerns, he told me I was overreacting, and that his family had been sleeping in the open air for 100 years without anyone getting sick. The first night after our wedding, everyone went to the sleeping porches. There were 8 of us, including my in-laws and Ryan's siblings, arranged on cots under the open sky. It was September, still mild, and I thought it might be okay. But as I lay there, I felt a tickle in my throat. By morning, my throat was raw. When I asked my mother-in-law if I could sleep inside, she laughed and called me delicate, insisting the mountain air was good for me. She dismissed my talk of PM 2.5 as city nonsense, claiming the local air was pure compared to recycled air-conditioned air. The season of smoke. October arrived, and with it the peak of the wildfire and controlled burn season. Massive amounts of smoke traveled across the state, mixing with local pollutants to create a toxic soup. In 2023, there were thousands of fire incidents across the region. I could see the haze during the day, a thick, grayish-brown layer. At night, the air felt heavy, like breathing through a wet cloth. Still, my in-laws insisted we sleep outside. I developed a cough that wouldn't go away, my eyes burned, and I was perpetually exhausted. I wasn't alone. Other women who had married into the town were suffering too. We would meet at the local market and compare notes. One had developed asthma, another chronic bronchitis, and one neighbor's infant was coughing so badly he couldn't keep his milk down. Our in-laws just called us weak city girls. In early November, I checked the AQI on my phone. It was 450, severe and hazardous. This was the level where health officials advise everyone to stay indoors, yet we were sleeping in it for 8 hours every night. I showed Ryan data about how pollution was linked to 15% of local deaths and how tiny particles could cause permanent lung damage. He just shrugged. I went to the bathroom and cried. The breaking point. By late November, the AQI spiked over 500, and sometimes 700. I was coughing up phlegm and had constant headaches. A local doctor confirmed I had a respiratory infection and told me to stay indoors, but my mother-in-law dismissed him as an exaggerator. We daughters-in-law even tried to prank our families to get them to move inside, playing spooky sounds or faking sightings of dangerous local wildlife. But we were just scolded for being immature. We felt trapped and powerless in a household that valued custom over our health. The turning point. Everything changed when a public health official from the State Department arrived. He had noticed unusually high rates of respiratory illness in Clearwater and called a town hall meeting. He explained that air pollution had reached crisis levels, with PM2.5 concentrations 40 times higher than World Health Organization guidelines. He stated that sleeping outside in these conditions was like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every night. The elders were skeptical until the doctor presented blood tests and X-rays from 50 residents. The results showed elevated inflammatory markers in everyone, including the daughters-in-law who had only lived there a few months. He showed that while sleeping outside made sense decades ago when the air was cleaner, the modern world had changed. He called the refusal to adapt self-harm. The town supervisor stood up and made an announcement. Effective immediately, the tradition of outdoor sleeping would no longer be a social requirement during the winter months. Families could choose to stay indoors without being ostracized. A new reality. That night I slept indoors for the first time since my wedding. I woke up without a cough. I could breathe. While some older families still cling to the old ways, most younger couples moved inside. We saw a dramatic decrease in illness across the town. I learned that traditions must evolve when conditions change. I also learned the staggering cost of this crisis. In the last few years, over 56,000 people in the broader region died prematurely due to pollution, with economic losses in the billions. It isn't just about fires, it's about vehicles, industry, and residential heating. I am sharing this because air pollution isn't an abstract number. It is real people getting sick. If you live in a high pollution area, please protect yourself. Monitor the AQI, use air purifiers, and wear 95 masks when necessary. Nothing matters more than being able to breathe.